It's showtime, folks!
Welcome to a landmark night in the industry of sports entertainment. I have seen it.
I, Vince McMahon, fought my competition.
And I still cannot believe it.
That's right. I own WCW.
1,000 Lakes, Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Mall of America, the only building big enough to hold the debut edition of WCW Monday Nitro. We are coming to you live here on TNT.
Hulkamania! Hulk Hogan is here! Hulk Hogan's here! Hulk Hogan is in the building!
You damn right he is!
Go get him, Hulkster! Yeah, on whose side is he on? What are you talking about? Whose side is he on? What are you talking about?
Yes, sir!
Get him, Hogan! Go get him, baby!
Come on and get some of this now.
Who's bad now, boys?
Hulk Hogan arrived. Hulk!
What is he doing?
My God!
Is he the third man?
He's the third man!
What the hell is going on here?
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW! He is the third man! Look at this picture!
Oh my God!
What the hell is going on?
Oh my God!
Are you kidding me?
Probably the lowest shot ever given to professional wrestling!
Is this your deal, Russo?
Wow.
That's why this company's in the damn shape it's in, because of bullshit like this.
My God, this is real life. 1, 2, 3.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
And welcome, fans, to a very monumental edition of False Count Radio. I am Andrew Carluck, and of course I'm not alone. I'm joined here today by the Pacific Coast player, JT Evans. JT, how's it going today?
What's cracking? Man, it is going good. I am, just enjoying the fact that we are going to reminisce on WCW.
Yeah, today was the 10-year anniversary of the final Nitro, so it seemed very appropriate to do this show on this anniversary, especially a guy like me who was always kind of more a WCW guy. And, really, I for one really missed the promotion. And a lot of these interviews we'll talk about, or we'll hear a lot of these guys who were really missed the promotion as well.
Yeah, we've got a great lineup of guests today. I remember actually flipping channels back and forth between WWE or WWF at that time, if I'm not mistaken, and WCW. I remember them doing the outdoor show for the last episode.
Right, yeah, and that was always funny because, well, I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later on towards when we actually talk about that era. But we definitely want to start, and without the very beginning of WCW, they wouldn't have had the success that they did. Of course, everyone knows that it grew out of the NWA, and you'll hear stories about this later, especially in our very first interview, about, exactly how that came about with Ted Turner coming in control and all the leadership changes, the Jim Herds, the Jim Barnett's, especially the Bill Watts. Just WCW at the beginning was a really great little regional promotion. Even though they didn't act like a regional promotion, they still had their pay-per-views, they had national television, but they worked like a regional promotion. And this is kind of where I get sort of nostalgic, because I think of the early days of a stunning Steve Austin. I remember thinking to myself, man, what a great technical wrestler this guy is. It's kind of funny to think of Steve Austin as a great technical wrestler, right?
That is funny. Huh. And one thing, like, honestly, in my opinion, WCW went out of their way to give the young guys a shot. Guys like Mike Sanders, who I don't think if he had trained with WWF or WWE, I don't think he would have gotten a fair shot. Guys like, Mark Jindrak and Sean O'Hare, I mean, look at what ended up happening to them. They went into WWF/E, and basically after that, I mean, where did they go? I mean, Mark Jindrak ended up down in Mexico, and where's Sean O'Hare nowadays? Last I heard, he was doing MMA.
Right, yeah, no, guys like that, they actually did have, I wouldn't say a successful run in WWE, but there was an era there where they were getting pushed. So, but, like you're saying, they wouldn't have gotten their opportunity if it wasn't for WCW and the power plant. But, in those early days, there was a lot of really great things going on. We still had, we had our first stable, and we'll hear a little bit about that in this first interview, in the Dangerous Alliance. A young Steve Austin, and there he is with guys like Larry Zbyszko and Rick Rude, and Paulie Dangerously as the manager, Bobby Eaton, and then just a lot of great things there. We had one of the more forgettable incarnations of the Four Horsemen, but to me, really the best part of those first couple of years at WCW. And, it seems like Steve Austin's being a theme here. Obviously, he's a huge superstar. The Hollywood Blondes. I don't know what you remember of that team, JT, but, that was a fantastic team who was not designed to get over. They were designed to put other teams over, teams like Too Cold Scorpio and Marcus Bagwell, teams like the Four Horsemen group of Arn Anderson and Paul Roma. They were designed to put those teams over, but they got over, and that was just a really, really incredible team.
Yeah, and like you said, obviously they weren't meant to get over, but look at Steve Austin nowadays. I mean, honestly, like, the teams back then, like, had more of a shot of becoming huge stars than they do nowadays, because nowadays wrestling is so oversaturated with people. And, you did bring up, of course, Steve Austin, but, there was a lot of different people around that time. I mean, Brian Pillman, of course, was teaming with him. I mean, come on now. If Brian Pillman had passed when he did, I think he'd be a top star today. Same, probably right there with Steve Austin, in my opinion.
Right, yeah, and I was, when I think of Brian Pillman, I think back to the documentary that WWE put out on him a couple years ago, and Paul Heyman said on that interview that he was about 5 or 6 years ahead of the industry, because he was doing things in 1989. There was a 1995 style, the flying drop kicks, the body presses to the floor, things like that actually by today's standards are kind of tame. In 1990, when he first started, those were revolutionary.
Shit, back then, if you think about it, a fucking middle rope elbow drop was a finish. I mean, even back then, a pile driver was a finish. Or let's just say let's even go more simpler than that, a fisherman suplex, just a regular suplex where you hook the leg. Those were finishers back in the day, and nowadays you look at it and you've got guys giving 15 of those during a match, or 15 elbow drops, Back then, a leg drop could be a finisher. Nowadays, you see everybody and their mom doing leg drops. Wrestling was a lot different back then, and it kind of showed on TV compared to nowadays. And all the wrestlers back then kind of looked alike in a certain sense, if you know what I mean. Like nowadays, everybody's kind of got their gimmicks and their personas. Back then, wrestlers just kind of had a generic look to them.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue into my next point. The next guy that I really admired watching back in that time had a finisher move of a power bomb, and that was Vader. Vader was a dominant champion in WCW for about a 2-year span. He ran over everybody. He destroyed Sting. He had a program with the British Bulldog. He pretty much ran insane for about a year and a half until he ran into Ric Flair at Starrcade of 1993. But, you know, that's the same thing. Vader did a moonsault. A 400-pound man doing a moonsault in 1992, 1993 was completely unheard of. A couple of years later, we'd see Terry Funk doing it. I believe Big Show tried it at one point in WCW, or as the Giant. But at the time, he kind of paved the, and you know, I actually look at a lot of these guys who use these moves as finishers to sort of pave the way for, you know, the first time that someone kicked out of those moves, it was almost unbelievable.
Yeah, honestly, you know, back then it was unbelievable, and you know, it's definitely a weird sight to see a guy like the Big Show or the Giant throw a freaking powerbomb.
And the final real big thing that WCW did in those early days, and when I say that, we're talking pre-Monday Nitro, is they brought in Hulk Hogan right after he had retired from WWF. And, you know, Hulk Hogan was done with wrestling. He was doing his TV show, Thunder in Paradise, which, if you remember, that was a great show. You know, and I know Sting did a couple episodes of that. And, you know, he had a lot of wrestlers on the show with him. But, you know, it happened to be taped at Universal Studios, which happens to be where WCW ran a lot of their programming. So the story goes, Eric Bischoff said, "What the hell, I'll give it a shot." Went down there, and he went there, and without Hulk Hogan also, there's a lot of things that would not have made WCW as lucrative a company as it became for a few-year period. Most importantly, Hulk Hogan being there, because without Hulk Hogan, there's no NWO.
Very true. You know, and honestly, back then in WCW, without Hulk Hogan, there wouldn't have been a lot of things. Like, you know, obviously, if there wasn't a Hulk Hogan back then there wouldn't be a Hulk Hogan in TNA now. And honestly, I think a lot of people wish there wasn't a Hulk Hogan back then.
Yeah, and, you know, it was at the point where he and Ric Flair were really not that young, considering they're still going today. But you were looking at them, it's like, really? And back in 1993, 94, you're looking at, like, can these guys please hang it up? You know? But we're going to go ahead and go into our first of our pre-recorded interviews, and this is one that we were really excited to be able to do. We had an interview with the living legend, Larry Zbyszko, so we'll go right to it now. And we are back here on the WCW Tribute Radio Show. We are joined by one person I truly wanted to get for this show. He is a true living legend of the wrestling business, Larry Zbyszko. Larry, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good, Andrew. You know, living in Orlando, floating in the pool, playing golf, going to Funlands now and then. It's hard to beat Florida, brother.
Right, yeah. So, first of all, I just want to thank you for doing the show, but we have some questions about your time in WCW. And if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and get started.
No, let's go.
All right. Now, first of all, how did you first get involved with WCW?
You know, that's an interesting story. It was kind of interesting. WCW formed when the NWA folded. You know, they got to the point where they were losing a lot of money and blowing a lot of money foolishly and not booking it correctly. So the Crockett's mom stopped, you know, wouldn't give them to Crockett boys, you know, any more money. So but Turner didn't want to lose the programming, so they basically, you know, sold it out, the NWA, to Turner, which became WCW. And at the beginning, I knew it was going to be kind of a cluster, and I was with the Crockett's. We're doing the baby doll thing, which kind of abruptly ended with me still having the Western States belt. In fact, Jax Pacific is coming out with an NWA Legend Series doll, and I'll be one of them with the Western States belt. Should be out any time. And but I went up to the AWA and you know, kind of finished up there for a while WCW was kind of forming. And it was interesting because at that time, you know, Vern, who probably should have closed down a little sooner than he did, was still, you know, trying to gut it out. And old school guy didn't want to give up and keep going. But at that time, the guys in the office, me and Greg, and a guy named Eric Bischoff, who was kind of in and out, you know, doing the interviews because Larry Nelson disappeared, they had this idea of doing an invasion angle to help AWA survive and WCW get off the ground. And it was kind of interesting because they wanted, like, you know, us to invade WCW and me with the world belt and the AWA championship, come in and at that time wrestle this new kid Sting, who, you know, after about 1,000 matches with Flair, wound up with the belt. And it was actually the first idea of the invasion angle, which down the road, another story, became the New World Order. But to make a long story short, that didn't happen due to politics. And then Vern shut the doors, but then I got a call from this guy, Jim Hurd, and they wanted me to come down and be part of WCW. So you know, I did. It was an offer I couldn't refuse. And, you know, it wound up really great.
Now, you talked about Jim Hurd there for a moment, and you were actually with WCW for all of the leadership. You were there with the early leadership changes with Jim Hurd, Bill Watts, the Eric Bischoff, even at the end.
There was another lawyer named Kip something. I mean, there was a new fearless leader every 6 months.
Right. So, you know, in your mind, what was really going on there in WCW? Was it more of a just like a flavor of the month kind of thing in that regard, or, you know, who really do you think was a true leader over the years there in that promotion?
Well, you know what it was. There really wasn't a leader, and that was kind of their problem for a while. What it was you have a difference. You got, you know, the WWF or E, whatever it is, which was a wrestling company. And then you had WCW, which was a wrestling show that was a subsidiary of, you know, Turner. It wasn't a wrestling company. It was just kind of a show. And it got lost in the confusion because a lot of the big shots at Turner weren't into wrestling. They had no idea what it was. Ted Turner was a big fan, and he loved it. And he's a sharp guy, and he realized that wrestling always got ratings. And it was just kind of hit and miss where these guys at the top echelon of TBS who knew nothing and had no idea what to do just wound up hiring guys out of the blue. Like when I first met Jim Hurd, nice guy. But as soon as I met him, I realized this guy don't have a clue. I mean, he was a guy that managed the Pizza Hut. So, you know, in terms of pro wrestling, the guy didn't have an idea how to do it right. And that led to all kind of mistakes. And then 6 months later, they got rid of him, and they had some lawyer, I think, named Kip in there. And again, a lawyer which was never in the wrestling business, had no idea what he was doing, and that led to all kind of mistakes. And then they decided, well, maybe we'll try a wrestling guy. And for some reason, decided on Bill Watts, who, and he's proud of it, was like one of the biggest assholes you'll ever meet. And after about 6 months, I couldn't wait to get rid of him because he was totally like non-corporate. And he would be like on the balcony, like 14 stories up in his office, taking a leak over his balcony, bouncing off the food court and cussing and, you know, saying all kind of derogatory words in a company that was squeaky clean. So, you know, he drove them nuts. Then they got rid of him. And then Eric Bischoff kind of wound up in there, which was kind of a luck out in a way because it wound up totally being something different than, you know, it started out being. But they went through so many different guys that really WCW was very stale. And of course, the whole wrestling business was kind of stale in the early years of the 90s. WCW became basically the NWA rehash. It was the same guys. I mean, God bless them, great talent, but, you know, Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair and the Wyndhams. I mean, it was the same crew that had been on TBS for so long. You know, then they started bringing in a couple of new guys like Sting and Lex Luger and Sid Vicious, but they had no idea, you know, how to bring these guys along and train them. So now you have a bunch of guys running around clotheslining each other, and the programming was so horrible that even the new guys couldn't get over that good. And it was really basically stale until 96, 97 when Bischoff wound up in there. But then there was kind of a group where Greg Gagne was involved in the booking. I wasn't really in the office because I didn't want to waste my time hanging out at the office, but I was involved in the group with me and Greg Gagne and Bischoff, who came from the AWA. and Mike Graham was involved a little bit, Kevin Sullivan. And we're the ones that came up with the idea of taking the invasion angle from the AWA that never happened, and we incorporated it, and we brought in Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and did the New World Order thing. So that's how that came around. It was actually an old idea from the AWA days that didn't happen until about 5-6 years later.
Now, in the early days of WCW, you were actually part of really their first stable, the Dangerous Alliance, included amongst many other very talented guys, young Steve Austin. Did you feel any kind of like a duty to sort of get that stable part there off the ground? Really, you were the most experienced of the wrestlers in that group. And what was your time like there in the Dangerous Alliance?
Well, it was interesting, but it went against my philosophy. Again, I think that was something that Bill Watts or something. To be honest with you, I really don't remember, but I don't like groups. In fact, wrestling is still into that mentality, which is now stale, where everything's got to be a group. Everybody's got to have a group, or they got the Nexus group, and groups don't draw money. The people in the business, they don't know. They never knew. And it's just, when you have groups, you make everybody the same. And it's kind of like wrestling is now, where everybody's the same. Everybody's good, but nobody's great. And I didn't like the group. And one reason, number one, was right before this Dangerous Alliance started, me and Arn were teaming as the Enforcers. And the Enforcers were really getting over big. Arn was great. And, me and Arn would walk out, it clicked, and you could feel that old school rumble when we walked out because people bought it. And then it diluted a bit, with the Dangerous Alliance. And the talent was good. Rick Rude was in it. He was, one guy. But, Stunning Steve at the time was a good upcoming talent, had a lot of potential and stuff. Paulie, and then threw the Medusa in. But groups are something that dilute people that could become stars, because to draw money, stars draw money, not groups, and that's kind of the problem today, where everybody's a group of guys. Everybody's the same, but nobody's great. It was like boxing. Boxing wasn't nothing, but then Muhammad Ali come along. He had one guy that was great, and it became big. Same day when Bruno, had one guy that was great, wrestling was huge. The Hulk got over for a while. One guy was great, wrestling was huge. And then it was stale. Stone Cold got over for a while. One guy was great, and the business was better, So I was never big on the group thing.
You remember that great match that you and Arn had with Ricky Steamboat and Barry Windham at the Clash of the Champions in November '91.
We had some classics with Bill Kazmaier and the Steiners, and then Dusty brought Dustin in, and then one with Dustin and Steamboat after me and Arn broke Barry's arm, and but it was a good tag team, and actually it was. I didn't like the whole group thing because it really took away from the Enforcers, which was something that was getting over. So it was like they shot themselves in the foot. Again, being run by the company by too many chiefs that didn't know what they were doing, unfortunately.
Now, shortly after you were sort of excommunicated from the Dangerous Alliance and storyline was when you began announcing. What was that transition like?
Well, it was an interesting story because, like I said, I wasn't big with the groups, and it was too bad that the Enforcers, they messed that up. And Bill Watts was in, and his... Not only did, he was not nice to deal with. His idea at the time was everybody who was established, everybody like 40 years old was worthless, and his idea was now to push young guys, which meant he's going to push his kid Eric Watts. And I saw him starting to abuse the talent. They book Eric Watts with Arn Anderson, who was great. And then in 5 minutes, Eric Watts would, stretch Arn Anderson in the ring, and nobody believed it. It was horrible. So I didn't want to wrestle anymore because I wasn't going to let the upper echelon and their stupidity wreck 20 years of my hard work. And it was kind of a luck out because my one knee, with the cartilage, I needed like a scope to clean my knee out. So I took a leave of absence and got a little knee scope. And then I was sitting around, the house, recouping. And at this time, I think they had Jesse the Body in there doing some voiceovers, but they didn't want to pay Jesse and fly him in. So they asked me, because I was under contract getting paid for sitting there, so they asked me if I'd sit in and do the broadcasting, to do the color work. So I said, sure. So I went and did some voiceovers, and all of a sudden one of the producers comes running in, and he says, Jesus, you're the best guy we've ever heard. You were great. And they offered me a hell of a contract to do the color commentating. At first, I was pissed off. I said, I spent 20 years becoming the living legend, and now you want me to be Shivani? But actually, it worked out good because I kept myself out of the line of fire of being destroyed by incompetent leaders. And I was also getting to the age where it worked out good, and I wound up getting more publicity, good publicity, because I wound up being on like most of the shows doing the commentating, and the fans loved me doing the commentating. So it was kind of a thing that happened that I really didn't even plan on, and worked out really good. So there's something to believe when it comes to destiny.
Now, what are some of your fondest memories of your time in WCW? Specifically, some of your fondest memories during the really lucrative period that WCW had in the late '90s.
Well, I had some cool ones. Like I said, when I got there, I really enjoyed teaming with Arn and doing some stuff, and then, of course, I wound up with the break. I didn't plan on with the broadcasting, and that worked out really good for me. But then it also gave me an opportunity a couple times to do something special that really got over cool. Like in the mid-'90s, they brought this guy in, Lord Steven Regal. And Regal was great. And he kind of reminded me of me. He used to get heat just standing there. But the upper echelon, they didn't know what to do with the guy. So I did a special thing where, I did an angle with Regal and stepped out of the broadcast booth and did a little feud with Steven Regal, and that was great because the guy could wrestle, he could do, it was like old school shit, and the people got into it, the ratings went up, and I did it to prove a point because I was getting so frustrated doing the broadcasting because at that time, talent was going down the drain. And the company was focused always on trying to copy what McMahon was doing. And back then, McMahon was into all the steroid guys, all the bodybuilders, because he liked the way men's bodies looked like that. But these guys weren't wrestlers, and they didn't care about the business. All they cared about was their bodies. And the art of it got lost to where now all of a sudden you got all these guys that looked like Lex Luger that could do nothing, couldn't do promos, couldn't have a match. All they could do was stand there with their arm out and give clotheslines. That was about it. So I got frustrated and said, let me do a match. So me and Regal went on TBS and did a 30-minute match and just put on a clinic without throwing one clothesline. Brian Pillman was running around going, oh, my God, it was a clinic, and they didn't throw one clothesline. It was great. I was trying to set an example to show these guys how to have a match and do something cool without standing there like an idiot just doing clotheslines because it got so boring. Again, wrestling was still kind of stale. And it didn't work, but at least I tried. And then, of course, the big thing with the New World Order was really exciting for me because I'm the guy that programmed the whole thing. Like I said, the idea came from an old AWA idea. And what we did was, brought Hall in and then Six Pack and then Nash. But I'm the guy that programmed it all and set it up the way it was supposed to happen, that it would mean the most. And it was the hottest thing wrestling ever did and ever will see. So it's something that makes me feel good forever. That I was, a big part of really making, something super hot. So So that was a big thrill. And then in fact, it got so hot, I couldn't help it. So then I programmed myself into doing a match with Bischoff and a match with Hall. And then, and then those two pay-per-views we did were the two biggest buy rates WCW ever had.
Definitely. Now, what is it that you feel caused the demise of WCW? Was there one event you could look at that sort of started that whole spiral?
Well, you know what? It wasn't really any kind of event within the business. What it was an event where Turner, unfortunately, and TBS Time Warner got conned and lied to by AOL. AOL came in and made it look like they had a whole lot more money than they really had. And I've heard later that Ted was kicking himself in the butt for ever falling for it. But then Turner Time Warner sold out to AOL. AOL didn't have the money they said. They messed everything up. The Turner stock took a dive, and Ted lost his power. Ted was the wrestling fan. And AOL it was just a simple matter of AOL did not want wrestling. They didn't want the Braves. They didn't want sports. They were a bunch of nerds or whatever they were. And they had no idea. They were computer nerds. They had no idea what was good television programming and what was over. And not only did they just cancel, they just canceled it. They were going to cancel it. And I knew that early because some of the people in WCW was like the daughters of the TBS big shots, and all of a sudden, mysteriously, they were getting transferred to different departments. So when WCW got axed, they wouldn't lose their jobs, stuff like that. But unfortunately, it was just something where AOL, that conned them all, just didn't want it, and they just simply canceled it. And then, again, like idiots and really morons, and they wound up giving away Turner's library worth, it could have been hours and years of great programming with all these old tapes. And they just gave it away to McMahon for like a couple $1 million. I mean, pennies. AOL are the stupidest group of people you'll ever meet in your life. It's unfortunate, but that's all it was. I mean, the last days, people can have all these theories about, then this guy was running it, and then they brought in Russo because he was Vince's writer, and he killed it, and he did because he has no business in the business. But unfortunately, it was just simply a matter of AOL buying Turner Time Warner and canceling the show.
So do you feel that if it wasn't for that merger, WCW would still be around?
Yep. If Ted Turner still, if it wasn't for that merger, WCW not only would have been around, it would have been the big game in town because we had a new star that was so hot that we could have made the next, superstar. And the WWE would have went into oblivion of a sideshow entertaining, stupidness. But Goldberg was ripe for the pickings, man. And the people he was over, even Hogan, switched the heat over to him, and we broke the decibel record in the Georgia Dome, and we had it all set up. We had the new hero of the new millennium. So WCW would have not only been, it would have been the biggest and the hottest, and it still would have been going today, and then we could have did it right. But unfortunately, that showbiz, Andrew, it just wasn't meant to be, I guess.
I guess not. Now, what do you miss the most about WCW?
Well, I just missed the whole thing. I miss doing the color commentating. I miss the excitement of being in the business. I miss the fans, going out to Nitro and the fans chanting Larry and getting excited and all that, and it's too bad. It's too bad like some guys get big stupid egos and don't realize that if it wasn't for the fans, they wouldn't be anybody, like this idiot Chris Jericho. But I miss the whole thing. I miss watching the new talent come up and their excitement. So it's too bad. It's too bad for the fans that AOL are a bunch of scumbags. It's really too bad.
All right, Larry. Well, I want to thank you for joining us and sharing your memories of WCW.
Those were the good old days, Andrew, and And you know what? For all the fans that were involved and the talent and everybody, it was something to be proud of, because unfortunately, the way things are nowadays, wrestling will never be bigger and never be hotter than we had WCW, brother.
All right. And we are back here on the WCW Tribute Radio Show. Man, what a great interview that was with Larry Zbyszko.
Yeah, man. As always, Larry's a great guy, and he definitely gave us an insight of what it was like in WCW through his time being there.
Yeah, he said something in that no one else, in fact, people told us the exact opposite in some of these other interviews. He told us that he felt that if it wasn't for AOL, WCW would be in business today.
Yeah, and that's kind of odd to me. Like, honestly, I don't see that being true. I see... either way, I think if you would have given it a year or two, WCW would have been down the drain no matter what. Yeah. They were spending money when they shouldn't have been on certain things that they shouldn't have spent money on.
And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I really feel that WCW, the beginning of the end for them was in 1998. So it was another almost 3 years that they were kind of on the way down when they actually went out of business. There's a couple of events then that happened, which we'll get into a little bit more. But right now we're going to talk about the beginning of Monday Nitro. The beginning of Monday Nitro, and I remember how I first heard about Monday Nitro because this was the pre-internet days. Mike Tenay used to have a syndicated wrestling radio show, the Wrestling Insiders, that played every Sunday morning on the local sports station here. And I was, so Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, I woke up because Mike Tenay was on. Of course, now with the internet, we can get all that stuff at any point. But that was how I've heard that WCW would have a Monday night show. It's kind of funny. You were talking about Hulk Hogan and TNA and think of Mike Tenay and TNA. But once upon a time, Mike Tenay was the man. He was the encyclopedia. But Monday Nitro was basically Ted Turner wanted to compete with WWF in some way. And the story goes, he asked Eric Bischoff, "How can I compete with WWF?" And Eric Bischoff came up with the most with the most off the wall idea he could: give me prime time on Monday night. And he gave it to him, which was apparently very surprising to Eric Bischoff. Now that first Nitro was. I remember the build up to it. They were talking about it on WCW television. They were talking about Emmy Award-winning broadcaster joining them. Bobby Heenan was saying, "Oh, was it Bob Costas? Whoever?" And it was Steve Mongo McMichael, a former Chicago Bear, who won a local Emmy in Chicago for his football analysis. So technically, he did win an Emmy, but it took place from the Mall of America, not an arena, but you could see the train store out there. I believe Hulk Hogan actually had a pasta restaurant in that mall at the time. One thing that really sticks out to me about that Nitro, two things really, but the first one is one of the main events of that event was Ric Flair versus Sting. So Ric Flair versus Sting was on the very first Nitro, and it was the main event of the very last Nitro. Also, there's a lot of fans who didn't order WCW pay-per-views. It was the first chance a lot of fans got to see Jushin Liger. You're very familiar with Jushin Liger there, JT. What a great talent he is.
One of my favorite wrestlers, actually. I feel that he brought a lot to the table, and this was actually one of our first shots to see him in America. Right,
yeah, they would occasionally book him on a pay-per-view, but if you didn't buy that pay-per-view, you never got the chance to see him. I remember in, I think it was 92, he had a great match on a pay-per-view with Brian Pillman. But, that was the first time we got a chance to see him. Luckily, we'd get to see him, Great Muta, Masa Chono, a lot of those Japanese, New Japan wrestlers, a little bit more as we went forward with Monday Nitro. But the big event on the first Monday Nitro, which was insanely huge, during the main event, actually I believe it was during the Ric Flair Sting match, Lex Luger came out. And again, this was pre-internet, so a lot of people didn't realize that Lex Luger's contract had expired with the WWF that morning. He signed with WCW that afternoon, and he was there. A lot of people don't know that that's the reason why WWE now has the 60-day no-compete clauses in their contracts.
This is very true. And, it wasn't just him that kind of set it off for the 90-day compete clause. It doesn't help when, a lot of wrestlers, with the 90-day compete clause, basically they can wrestle indies. They just can't do national shows. But a lot of wrestlers didn't care back then because there was no compete clause. So you'd see guys jumping back and forth, guys that were getting released from the WWF would jump to WCW, guys that were leaving WCW would jump to the WWF. It was kind of like a trend. It was like a revolving door. If you didn't see him in one company, you knew that, within the next couple of weeks, you'd see him in the other.
And also, this is when ECW was catching a lot of steam, too. So we were seeing guys come from ECW. And in those first few weeks, we saw a lot of those guys come in. We saw Sabu come in the second week of Nitro, and he wasn't there very long. But we saw Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko. Say what you will about Chris Benoit and the way his life ended, but he was a fantastic wrestler, and he definitely showed it there. And very early in his career, in those first couple months of Nitro, they reformed the Four Horsemen. Chris Benoit was one of them, and that was a major push for his career, as well as Brian Pillman's to become members of the Four Horsemen. And at that point, a lot of the incarnations of the Four Horsemen have become very stale. But at that point, you had Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Brian Pillman, and Chris Benoit. I personally thought that was the best group of Four Horsemen since the late 80s.
And honestly, throughout WCW, it kind of seemed like they kept the Four Horsemen around longer than they should have, because there was a lot of guys, in my opinion, that didn't deserve to be a part of the Four Horsemen that got shots to be in the Four Horsemen.
Yeah, definitely. But this whole era that sparked the famous Monday Night War, and we saw that Starrcade of 1995. We saw WCW versus New Japan. So we saw great match with like Sting and Kensuke Sasaki. We saw it was a best of 7 series. I believe Chris Benoit wrestled Shinjiro Otani. Just a lot of the wrestlers that a lot of us weren't familiar with, we got to see. And like I said, a lot of those other ones we got to see later on. Jushin Liger was part of that. Masa Saito was part of that. Masa Chono was part of that. A lot of guys that are really great wrestlers, but we didn't really get the chance to see there a lot.
Yeah, and honestly, it all goes back to, it just kind of seems like, WCW gave a lot of guys shots that most companies would have. I doubt we would have seen a lot of the Japanese influences in WWF. I mean, yeah, they brought in a couple, but look at what they did with them. You know what I mean? So honestly, it all goes back to, WCW kind of gave guys shots that nobody else would have. And through that, you ended up seeing guys like Great Muta and people like that, and obviously the Masahiro Chonos and people like that. And honestly, if you think about it, the whole WCW versus the Japanese company kind of set the door for what WWE ended up doing down the road later on.
Yeah, definitely. And, also you were talking about things WWF wouldn't do, but WCW kind of set the trend for it. And to go back to my previous point of, bringing in the Eddie Guerrero, the Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, those are guys that WWE had for tryouts earlier that year and didn't bring them in because they didn't feel that they were exciting enough for a crowd, because at that point a lot of the WWF superstars were still, outside of like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, were still the big guys. They were still kind of pushing those big guys. I believe Diesel was still their champion at that point. So seeing those guys come in, that's a lot of, again, that's the first chance a lot of the fans got to see these guys, because ECW was in syndication, and if you happen to carry be in an area where they didn't carry it, and like for instance I was, but as soon as they did the whole thing with Tommy Dreamer and Kimona and Beulah McGillicuddy, it got taken off almost every network they had. So if you had been watching ECW, you didn't get that opportunity anymore in a lot of instances.
Yeah, which kind of sucked, and honestly, like, I remember the first time I flipped on WCW, actually. I think I was just browsing. I had been watching WWF and just kind of flipped to a channel and was like, whoa, there's another wrestling company. You know what I mean? Yeah.
You were just familiar with WWF because it was a little more kid-friendly, so that was kind of what you were used to, and it was always WWF is where wrestling is. And, let's be honest, if it wasn't for them, WCW would never have been as successful. But, of course, at the same time, WCW was made to put themselves in a position to become successful. Now, actually, in that early era, one wrestler came out, and WCW did not make a lot of stars in their time. They got their success from established stars. We'll talk about one of those stars later in Goldberg, but in this early era, they created a star currently known as the Big Show. In WCW, he was known as the Giant. And at first, I remember they tried to tell the fans that he was Andre the Giant's son. And that was, he threw the little puffy shirt that Andre wore in The Princess Bride at Hulk Hogan at a pay-per-view. And, that was just really unable to believe. But, you saw him running out for a couple months, and his first match was Halloween Havoc of '95, and he won the world title from Hulk Hogan in that match.
And honestly, back then, when they tried to do the whole Giant angle, the internet, if I'm not mistaken, was just kind of slowly, picking up. They were slowly starting to get dirt sheets and shit. So people were still believing it at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I can look at it, and I could realize, but I guess I was a smart mark in the days before smart marks, pretty much. But, in that match, another wrestler debuted, and he went at the time as the Yeti. Later, we'd see him in Raven's Flock as Reese. He's Big Ron Reese, and we actually have a pre-recorded interview that we're going to play with him, and we're going to get to that right now. All right, and we are back here on the WCW Tribute Radio Show. We are joined by a man who's had several different characters over the years in WCW, most notably Yeti, the Reese from the Flock, and Big Ron Studd, a direct take from his trainer, Big John Studd. We are joined by Ron Rice today. Hopefully I didn't say that wrong. How are you doing, Ron?
It's Reese like the peanut butter cup. That's all right.
Just like your character in the Flock, too. So Reese.
Yes. Yes. Well, I was trying to keep it very simple. I'm like a stripper, I can't get too crazy with the stage name, otherwise I forget who to call me.
That way you could remember your name easily. I get it.
Yes.
Now, my first question here is, how did you originally get involved in WCW?
Well, I was playing basketball over in Europe, and I was just sort of tired of it, and my agent had played golf with Big John Studd at a celebrity golf tournament, so he knew him. And the next time Big John Studd came out to the West Coast, I met up with him and told him I wanted to get into wrestling, and he was trying to get back into it. And it was the time of the great migration from WWE or WWF at the time to WCW. So he was thinking about doing that, and he got cancer and got sick. And then I just came down and was like, hey, and they're like, well, we got the power plant, and pretty much I just started at the power plant and went from there.
Oh, wow, so you were in the power plant.
Yes.
Now,
the infamous power plant.
Yeah, a lot of superstars came out of there, and a lot of superstars came out of there as well. Now, you spent quite a few years in WCW, and like I said, you were in part of quite a different array of gimmicks and storylines and angles.
Sure.
What are some of your fondest memories from your time in WCW?
I just think overall it was a lot of fun. Everyone had a pretty good time, and going down to Disney once every couple months for a couple weeks was always a lot of fun. I remember coming out with the Monday night show and going after Raw. I remember some crazy times with Eric Bischoff announcing who's going to win the matches on Raw and stuff like that. I mean, that was pretty cutting edge TV at the time of stuff that we were doing. It's pretty much just normal stuff now. So it was great, and I believe when we were doing it, we were on for 2 years at the top of the thing.
Yeah, almost 2 years. I think it was 84 weeks exactly. But yeah, there was a lot of time there. Now, what was one experience that you had in WCW that really kind of upset you?
I just thought the overall lack of leadership there. There was no real plot or anything in there. It was just pretty much just go with it, And I saw that Chris Jericho was talking about when he went to WWE, that each guy had a guy that sort of led him through the matches and stuff. And when he went to WCW, it was just sort of like, well, here's the finish, now get there, And it's like, all right, whatever,
Yeah. Now, a lot of the people that we interview, they have a lot of good ribs and road stories that happen. Can you share a funny locker room or road story from your time in WCW?
Well, I'll never forget, I was wrestling as the Giant Yeti, and I went to the pay-per-view, and I was the Super Giant Ninja Yeti, and I was, scared to death. Didn't know what was going on with my first real pay-per-view, and I got out there, and Brian Pillman just came up there and twisted my mask around so I couldn't see, and by the time I got it back up, I was knocked out of the ring and back in the locker room. So it sort of took a lot of nervousness away from me trying to figure out how to see out of a mask, so it was pretty good. Also, Perry Saturn used to make me press slam him off my knees. Everyone thought that was really fun.
Now, obviously every company has some issues, and you talked about the leadership a moment ago, but what are some of the other problems that you saw during your time in WCW?
I just think, obviously, the drugs were a big problem, and when we were on top, everything was great. It's like being on a winning team. When you're winning, there's no problem. It's when you start losing that all the friction and animosity comes out.
And what do you feel was one of the main contributors to the demise of WCW?
I don't know. Everyone tries to pinpoint it on something from Bischoff to this, to that, to this. I think just maybe that they went to the NWO angle one too many times. I think also once it got sold from Turner, it was, pretty much a foregone conclusion that it wasn't going to just be sold and shut down.
That's what a lot of people say. Just the people who bought it just were not into wrestling.
Yeah, it was no longer the protected child. So. Right.
Now, what do you miss the most about WCW?
The money. And then the friendship. It was good paychecks, so that was always nice. The traveling was great. Meeting the fans and doing all that kind of stuff was a lot of fun. But overall, it was a good experience. It was a really good experience for, being young and single.
So this next question is one I was really looking forward to asking you, because like we were talking about, you were you played a lot of characters. As the Yeti, you were actually in the Giant's first match where he defeated Hulk Hogan for the championship.
Yeah.
What do you feel, and I hope I didn't just answer this question, but what do you feel was the best storyline or angle that you were ever a part of?
Well, I thought the Flock was really good, and we were getting a pretty good run on that. And then, to be honest with you, I think a lot of egos got bruised by how we were sort of viewed as a mid-card combination, and then we just got, I blame it all on Lodi. Lodi got so much heat that everyone was upset with us for stealing their heat. So, it's tough when Lodi's in the front row and in between matches and 15,000 people are yelling, "You suck." And then, the main event guys come out and they don't say anything. So, sort of put some guys in some tough positions.
It was right when we were getting ready to get to the end of that. What were you thinking when that stable was ending?
I thought it was really good, and they kept saying they were going to keep us going, and then they were like, "Well, we're going to split things off," and then they sat me down, and were like, "Hey, we're going to take you off TV for 60 days, and then bring you back," and I thought that was great, and I trained real hard, and they brought me back. I was going to be the Maestro's bodyguard. And then I just, they never really did the piano thing with the Maestro like they were supposed to. So, I don't know, It is what it is.
Okay, Ron, well, I want to thank...
The problem with WCW, I thought, was like one guy would tell you one thing, and then there was 13 other guys that had other plans for you. So, it's like, you never knew what was going on.
All right, Ron, well, I want to thank you for joining us today. All right, and we are back here on the WCW Tribute Radio Show. You just heard an interview with Big Ron Reese, formerly the Yeti, formerly Big Ron Studd, formerly Reese, formerly a lot of things. What a great extensive interview. He was a really great guy, and he's actually a very, very funny man. So that was a great little interview there. But starting in 1996. A new group took over, and it's a group that changed the wrestling business. If you heard our show this past Wednesday with Larry Zbyszko, he told us that he actually came up with that idea back in 1991 when the AWA went out of business, and that was the NWO. But, without the NWO, without this story I'm about to tell, there is no NWO. This is a story that took place in the WWF, and it was on May 19th, 1996 at Madison Square Garden. Scott Hall, Kevin Nash wrestled their last matches for WWF. At the end of the event, Shawn Michaels, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, and I believe Sean Waltman, 1-2-3 Kid, came out as well, and they were out there celebrating. A lot of wrestlers say that they broke character, they compromised the business, one thing real quick before we get back into this, JT, what's your feeling on that?
Honestly, like back then, things were considered a lot different, than it is nowadays. So maybe back then they might have, you know what I mean? But nowadays, it takes a whole lot for you to break it because pretty much it's all out there in the open.
Do you think? I'm sorry. Do you think that the reason that things like that are a little more normal now is because of several events, this being one of them?
Yeah, kind of to a point, but I think that the internet's pretty much a lot of the reason. I don't think it's just any particular person. I think, people might have a little bit to do with it, but I think it's more has to do with just the internet in general. I think that as soon as the internet became popular, there was a lot more internet marks than there was back in the day. So things kind of got out there, especially with people like the Dave Meltzers and people who didn't care that they'd sell the information onto the news sources. You know what I mean? And you had, obviously, in WCW around this time, the internet was still slowly picking up. So you had different news sources within the company that would be selling, different results before they'd happen to the news sources just to make themselves an extra quick $100-$200. Yeah,
and we've seen a lot of things in recent years. For instance, you'd see DX in recent years telling jokes about, I don't know who the guy is that knocked up Stephanie McMahon, and Triple H saying, man, he must be really hung, and obviously a play for the all of internet fans who know that obviously that's him. But back to here in WCW, a week after that, Scott Hall showed up on Monday Nitro, and this was effectively the beginning of the New World Order. And he was slapping around Eric Bischoff. He was interfering in matches. A couple weeks later, Kevin Nash showed up, and at this point, you knew something big was going on. A lot of people don't realize there was a lawsuit that went on during this because Scott Hall was still speaking in the Razor Ramon voice. He wasn't referring to himself as any character, so WWE actually filed a lawsuit with WCW, telling them that these guys cannot be playing their characters from WWF. And it got to where Eric Bischoff had to ask them on a pay-per-view, "Do you work for the WWF?" Which was the first time that we ever heard these companies acknowledge each other on the air.
Yeah, and honestly, with that at that time, that was huge because, they kind of didn't want to acknowledge people. And honestly, not only did they not want to acknowledge people, but they were kind of doing their own thing at that point. But also at the same time, they were competing against each other. As to where nowadays, in my opinion, if WCW was still around or if WWE had not bought them out, I think they'd still be kind of doing, I think they'd be doing kind of the same thing nowadays, just for the simple fact that, what is there really that you can do that hasn't been done? I mean, wrestling's been around for so long. I mean, it started out as a carnival thing. So what is there that really hasn't been done nowadays?
Right. And I do actually take my last statement back because they did WCW did acknowledge WWF previously because Eric Bischoff would be giving away their results because
I remember that.
Raw was taped and Nitro was live, whereas now, unless they're overseas or the holidays or something, Raw is live every week, so I guess no one can do that anymore. This all led to an event at Bash at the Beach where it was to be Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and their third partner against Randy Savage, Sting, and Lex Luger. And Lex Luger got injured early in that match. Lex Luger get injured, go figure.
That's what happens when you do a shitload of roids, honestly.
Yeah. So the remainder of that match was Scott Hall and Kevin Nash versus Sting and the Macho Man. And at the end of this match, Hulk Hogan came out, and everyone was convinced Hulk Hogan was coming out to take Lex Luger's place. But lo and behold, he He did the opposite. He leg dropped Macho Man, effectively changing the wrestling business as we knew it at the time. I remember watching this, and again, this was the internet was in its infancy. I myself didn't have access to it at this point. This is when the pay-per-views were kind of scrambled, and I was too cheap to buy it, so I just put it on and I just listened to what was happening, But shortly after this, the NWO really went in full swing, really started acquiring guys. Ted DiBiase came in, the Giant joined them, Sean Waltman came in, and then they just put a memo out, anyone that wants to join the NWO, do it. Buff Bagwell came out immediately, turned on his partner, Scotty Riggs, Scott Norton, almost any name you can imagine really joined them. But really, it didn't really start to hit it until they basically turned Sting against WCW in a way, causing some disbelief that Sting had turned on them. And this episode was actually recently on the Monday Night War on WWE's On Demand service. And so Sting walked away. He walked away from the company. And it was a few months before we'd see him, and he'd come back in a whole different character. The makeup as we know him today, really changing Sting for years to come.
Yeah, and honestly, at that point, seeing guys turn on WCW was kind of a huge thing. Nobody really knew that it was all just storylines back then, because once again, the internet wasn't as big as it is nowadays. A lot of the fans back then were more drawn into it, as to nowadays they're kind of like, well, this is a storyline because wrestling is fake. And it's not that wrestling's fake, it's that it's choreographed. There's a difference, everyone knows the finish. That's, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah, and that's kind of when I talk to people, in like my work life and things like that, that's kind of what they don't get. They see guys on TV like the "It's Still Real to Me" guy, and think that that's your typical wrestling fan. But that's not the point here. This was really the first time when you would see, and this really had laid the foundation for the cool bad guy. These guys were really, a lot of people liked them because they, especially with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, they were just funny. They would tell jokes out there, and I remember them saying, Lex Luger reminds me of Mr. Ed one day, just little things that just kind of made you chuckle. And so this is when you started seeing the heels have their own T-shirts. You didn't see that very often beforehand.
Yeah, and honestly, back then, a lot of the guys, if they had T-shirts, they were generic, and the NWO kind of had their own little gimmick going on. And over time, as you watch, the WCW product and see the NWO, you'll notice that a lot more of the fans started getting them. Now, I don't know if they, were giving them away at the door or if all these fans were buying them, but either way, that's really good marketing.
They were all over the place. I actually still have my NWO shirt.
See, and it's fans like you that, keep stuff alive in wrestling, honestly, in my opinion, because, half these fans, and here's another thing to think about. An average fan is a fan for maybe 8 years, and then they stop watching the product. But a true fan keeps everything they've ever bought. Like me, I still have the shirts from when I was a kid of the wrestlers. Like when they used to sell T-shirts at like Target and places like that of the wrestlers, I still have all those WCW ones, WWF ones. I have all of those. I have the action figure still. And granted, yes, I'm a worker, but, every wrestler is still a mark to a point. And I just keep everything because, hell, you never know. One day it may be valuable, or, hey, when I have kids, 10, 15 years down the line, I can pass those on to my kids. And my kids can be like, who's that, Daddy? And I can show them the footage and maybe turn another wrestling fan. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Shawn Michaels made that statement a few years ago. When he was talking about the beginning of DX and trying to be funny out there, like back in the days when they almost got the show kicked off the air, where he was like, everyone in this locker room used to be a fan. This is what who knows what the fans want to see better than the fans. So that was sort of a comment that he made. I mean, I still have the PWI 500 from 1993.
Wow. See, yeah, I have some older magazines like that. but definitely not the PWI. And here's one thing, okay? You just brought up a good point. Obviously, workers know better than fans, but not only that, but like as a worker, I'm able to come up with way better storylines. Like just for instance, today I had a promoter call me and wanted to book me. I threw him an idea that I thought would work just because I didn't think of it as a wrestler. I thought of it as a fan. If you haven't seen a guy in a couple of years, and this guy is who's been around for a while is out in the ring, and he's being double teamed by a tag team and he has no partner, and all of a sudden this guy that's been gone for a couple of years come rushing out to save him, and they form a team that they used to have, the crowd's going to go crazy, so it helps being a fan of the product.
Right, definitely. Now, throughout 1996, around the time that Scott Hall and Kevin Nash started showing up, through all of 1997 and through April of 1998, WCW won that ratings war every single week. I believe it was 84 weeks in a row. Now, 1997 was a really big year for WCW. The NWO was going strong. They brought in Masahiro Chono and the Great Muta as the NWO Japan tag team. They had a great match, I think, at Bachelor Beach that year with the Steiner brothers. You had Sting, who was doing the Crow thing, and he wasn't talking. He was just watching and occasionally coming in and hitting the Scorpion Death Drops. He didn't wrestle until Starrcade of that year when he wrestled Hulk Hogan. I'm looking through my sets of 1997, and that they had the NWO pay-per-view that year. We had the emergence of Diamond Dallas Page in his feud with the Macho Man. Diamond Dallas Page went from being a mid-carder to being a main event. He had two pay-per-view matches with Randy Savage that year, and they both were the main event of those pay-per-views. We had seemingly the end of the Four Horsemen with Kurt Hennig turning on them, joining the NWO. Seems like every storyline, every major storyline, and every major turn during this time, it had something to do with the NWO, which, as we'll talk about later, was kind of their downfall. But without a doubt, the end of the year was huge that year because there's 3 events that happened in the last 2 months that were insanely huge. One, like I said, was Sting coming back and defeating Hulk Hogan at Starrcade. The other was Bret Hart becoming part of WCW after the Montreal Screwjob. And the third is November 17th, 1997. Some say it's a date that will live in infamy. Rick Rude appeared on a taped Raw and a live Nitro on the same night.
See, and that's crazy shit right there, because back then it could be done. Nowadays it would be hard as fuck to do, and you have the compete clause, so it couldn't be done. But back then, that was huge for wrestling. People were like, how the hell was that done? Because a lot of fans didn't know that it was taped, other than when Eric Bischoff would give away results.
Right, and at this point, Eric Bischoff was running with the NWO. He wasn't announcing, so you didn't really get that. But, and going through to 1998, the first couple months, WCW was still running strong. We had Sting with the championship. Hulk Hogan got it back. I think Scott Hall had a shot in there somewhere. But I believe it was April 13th of 1998, WWE won their first ratings war of in 84 weeks with a main event of Vince McMahon versus Steve Austin right at the beginning of their storyline, which was a great show. Both shows were great that night. WWE squeaked out a victory, and realistically, it kind of started going downhill from there. I mean, they traded ratings victories for a while, but it was pretty much done at that point. Not done, but they were on their way out. And, we'll talk a little bit more about that after we get back here. And this next interview is with someone who was with WCW during this whole era and through the end. And this is a really great interview that I conducted with Che from the Nitro Girls. So enjoy this. And we are back on the WCW Tribute Radio Show here. We are joined by someone who was with WCW during the glory days of the Monday Night War. She is a former Nitro girl. We are joined by Che. Che, how are you doing today?
Great. How is everybody? It's so great to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. A few questions about WCW and your time there. If you don't mind, let's go and get started.
Sure.
Okay, so first of all, how did you get involved with WCW, and more notably, how did you get involved with the Nitro Girls?
Well, I was very lucky. I was at the time cheering for the Falcons, and one of the girls, one of the Nitro girls, AC Jazz, she was a former Falcons cheerleader. And I think she actually got connected with Kimberly early on in the process of Kimberly putting the group together. Putting the group together, and Amy offered Kim, would you like for me to hold an audition and let the former and current Falcons cheerleaders know to audition for it. So I got very lucky, and I happened to have the look that Kim was looking for, and everything else from then was just, memorable, just experience.
Now, what were some of your fondest memories of that time in WCW? And as I was saying when I was introducing you, you were there during the quote-unquote glory days. How were those days, and what are some of your best memories?
I was there from day one to the very, very last day, over in Panama City 10 years ago. And, gosh, I have so many, many great memories. Well, the biggest thing, I think, is not just memories, but it's the friendship that I've created with the people that work for the company, especially the girls. And we still stay very close in touch. We all have we all have our own new grown-up responsibilities now, so we don't get together as often as we'd like. But we're constantly trying to connect via phone or email, even on Facebook, thankfully now. And in other things, gosh, I would have to say it's just traveling every different city. I mean, from the biggest to the smallest cities in the States. When you fly, you have that book. It's like, for instance, if you fly on Delta on Skybook, if you look to the very back, it shows you a map of U.S. and all the little cities, and I can honestly sit there and check off every one, smallest to the largest cities. And, of course, national tours were incredible. We went to Europe a few times, and one of my favorite international trip was, of course, to Australia. It was like right after their Olympics when they hosted it. So it's just, gosh, it's just too many to list. And I wish it would have gone on forever, but then again, it's we kind of rode, the great times during the height of it. But I'm just really glad and thankful that I had the opportunity.
Now, we had Spice on our show a few weeks ago, and she was telling us about just how close that you guys actually were, that you really were the best of friends, and stayed that way to the end, whereas a lot of the stories we've heard from WCW was that there was a lot of people who would get upset and things like that, even as the women's locker room grew, where it grew from you to, from the 7 or 8 of you to 25 ladies.
Right.
Now, was there any experiences you had in that time that really kind of upset you and left a bad taste in your mouth?
You know what? I had to say I don't remember any. I really don't, because I think that the great thing about it was that we had a chance to really bond and gel before the other girls came along. And for some of us, we spent more time with each other than we did with our significant others, whether it was husbands or boyfriends. And in real life, when you meet somebody by chance and you hang out and you feel that things kind of don't click and you don't really put the time and effort into making that friendship work, and you would just kind of rather kind of part ways. I'm like, I don't really want to hang out with her, or I don't really want to hang out with him. But with us, it's almost like we didn't have a choice but to put the time and effort in. And it really kind of came down to we had to love each other for what we didn't like each other's were, and we had to, and we obviously loved each other for the things that we liked about each other. So it was like a true relationship. I guess kind of how marriage should be. But instead people just kind of opted, divorce. But with us, divorce wasn't an option. So we really got to respect, at the end of the day, each other's differences, and kind of focus on the good things and positives of each other. And so when the other girls came along, you know, and it's so incredible. Like, I met the most amazing women, you know, during this process. And there weren't any, you know, sometimes people kind of think that I live in a la-la land because I kind of let things kind of roll off of me. I don't notice a lot of things, but, you know, so if there was any kind of cattiness, I really didn't notice any. I mean, one thing, if anything, you know, I you know, with girls, appearance is everything. And we always kind of, you know, maybe we exchange some catty words, you know, among each other, you know, about some of the girls' great shaped bodies, you know, as you're eating, you know, a donut, you know, but, no, everything was good, I thought, at least.
It sounds like you were really open with, you know, not only being close with the people you started with, the Fire, the AC Jazz, the Spice, people like that, but also, you know, the Stacy Keeblers and Charmel's that came in later on as well.
Yeah, Charmel is like still, I mean, one of my best of friends. I moved to Dallas and she lives in Houston, so it's about 3.5 hour drive. And actually, I went down and saw her last weekend. So it was really good to see her, and you know, they all came to my wedding about a little over 3 years ago, and actually, Spice, Fire, and Tigress, they were all in my wedding. So.
So you really built relationships that stood the test of time.
Yes.
Now,
yeah. And we joke about it. We're like, oh my gosh, you know, when we're in our 60s and 70s, when we're rocking in our rocking chair, we're going to show our grandkids, you know, the glorious days of us in like little to nothing and, you know, kind of, you know, working it in the ring. So it's interesting, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, can you share a funny locker room or a road story from your time in WCW with the Nitro Girls?
Funny. Well, you know what? Not funny, but there was like one thing that I do remember when we went to England on a tour. One of the hotels that we stayed at it wasn't like a major city like London. It was more like maybe Newcastle or something. Apparently, the hotel that we stayed in was haunted. So all the girls kind of had their little stories, and at first it kind of, you know, I think different things happened to them. Like one of the girls, I think her name was Shannon, and her stage name was Baby. She said that she was unpacking a room, and out of nowhere, like a penny hit the window and landed like in front of her, out of nowhere. And I, you know, now that I think about it, I'm like, was it American penny, or you know, was it a euro, or was it a dollar? But and then she said something else. She said, oh, she had a toiletry bag, like a clear plastic bag, and she had all her like lotions and shampoo and stuff in there. And she said it was, when she got it out of her bag, it was still zipped up, but lotion and everything was all over outside of it. And then from there, you know, and she didn't tell many girls. And then from there, like a couple of the girls brought up, and even some of the guys brought up some things that kind of happened to them. And we were at the bar, of course, where else? And, you know, the conversation came up, and the bartender actually told us that the hotel was haunted. So that was kind of eerie. So, like, I mean, from there, I mean, I remember I was walking on my tiptoes.
Now, obviously, every company has some issues, and you mentioned earlier that you didn't have any issues in WCW, but was there anything that you saw during your time there that made you think, what's going on here?
What are you talking? Are you talking towards the end?
Right. Yeah. Was there anything that made you kind of realize that the company was sort of on its way out?
No, not at all. Because up until the very end, all I knew was Eric Bischoff was in the picture, very loud and clear. I know that he was trying to find. I think he was trying to, like, you know, tie up the last couple loose ends to purchase the company. And that's what we heard. And when WWE just didn't come into the picture until the very last final second, it seemed like. So it was like a huge surprise to all of us.
And what do you feel caused the demise or the eventual end of WCW?
I'm sorry?
I said, what do you think kind of caused that, that put the company in such a peril that they were forced to sell?
It's not really my place to say. Like I said, I think I spoke with you before we started rolling. We never consider ourselves as the major league players. We were kind of, the boys were in the major leagues, and we were kind of at most AA, I would say, semi-baseball, if you kind of compare it to that. So I didn't really. It's almost like we kind of went in, we were focused on our job, and we didn't really try to meddle too much into the whole drama and the backstage business part of the business. But from what I can say, if I can say this, I think there was just way too much ego, and it's good to always kind of step out of the box and know that you are one of many and not the only one. And and like the world kind of doesn't revolve around you, but I think there were too many people there were too many chiefs, I think, in the tribe. And I think it's, and it's almost like, we divided and got conquered. We divided ourselves and we got conquered. So, I think, I think it could have been a really good thing, because it's not like, wrestling was losing its steam, because look at WWE. They're still going strong. And so I think it was self-inflicted, within the top handful of people who, who had a lot of power.
Now, having said that, what do you feel the Nitro Girls contributed to the show?
I think we contributed tremendous things. It's amazing. And what's so odd is we actually had a P.O. box in Atlanta, and somehow I think what happened was, I don't know if you guys know any personal stories, but my brothers and I, we have same first names. We came from Korea, and we have, so we have same first names. And somehow they found one of my brothers in Atlanta and started sending trading cards and whatnot and photos, for me to sign. So when my brother directed those to me, I signed them, and then I just put our P.O. box address on it. And this was only to maybe about a handful of people. Now from there, it's just everywhere. And from there, we started getting a lot of mail into that, to that P.O. box. So I think that shows that we did make an impression, and I think it was a positive impression. And when Nitro Girls first came on, because we were affiliated with Turner, they wanted more of a family atmosphere, and I think they really did a great job, creating the concept. And it was just, I think we were wholesome, and I think we were very marketable in every level. And we also they used us as goodwill ambassadors. And it was, when people say women of wrestling, immediately, people kind of go back to the traditional role, and they can kind of have somewhat of not a very too positive idea about them. But when you kind of put us out there with, different backgrounds and with this wholesome image, it was so much easier for us to reach so many different levels of people, including, which was my favorite, kids. And my favorite was when, one of the first shows after we debuted, this little girl had on a homemade shirt. It said "Future Nitro Girl," and that right there kind of said it all. And that's what we wanted us to represent, and I still believe we did that.
Yeah, and that was a really great thing that you were wholesome in an era when the wrestling business was kind of getting a little bit raunchier.
Right. And and that's when WWE was kind of, they didn't have, they kind of didn't have too many restrictions put on them, but like with us, we had somebody from Turner that kind of went through everything, went through the whole show, making sure that that we stayed as family friendly as possible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The standards and practices guy always around. What do you miss the most about WCW?
Family. They were family, and oddly enough, on Facebook there's a page where a few of the producers started, and they're doing a reunion party for everybody that was involved with WCW, and I didn't, and it's just, you don't realize that there were hundreds of people that were involved to make each and every one of these shows possible, and I'm so grateful to every one of them, and you don't realize it, but it was a family, and it's amazing how everybody's so excited to have reconnected with everybody. There's this one guy that messaged me on Facebook, and he was the voice of the promos, and not only do we not ever see his face, but he was such a big part of the show, and he was the voice of the promos and any kind of promos that was shot and shown on Nitro, and he did that for like over 6-7 years. And there's so many more of these wonderful people with this great talent that made the show possible, and we're all family, and not even those people that we never got to see, but people we got to see every week, from the cameraman to every crew member to the producers, and it just even the lady that made our costumes and makeup artists, it was family. And every week it was almost like, big families, and they have like a Sunday family dinner at grandma's every Sunday, spaghetti dinner. It was kind of like that. Like every Sunday you went to this, but it was in a different city, but you went to a place where you got to see all your family members, and you got to catch up, and, and then you kind of go off the following day, and then you went off knowing that you're going to see them again in a week.
Wow.
So.
And my final question is, you mentioned that you were there from the first day of the Nitro Girls all the way through the end of the last show. What are your memories of that final show?
It was, every time I think about it, I can vision the whole venue like it was yesterday, and gosh, I just remember seeing. If I'm correct, I think Vince's son was there.
Right.
And I just remember seeing him, and he just looked so odd. It was like it's like seeing a fish out of water. I'm like, what is he doing here? It's just like he didn't belong in this scene that I'm looking at. Again, we still put on our smiles and we did our job, but it was I have to say it was very tough, and it was almost like you were madly in love with somebody, and all of a sudden out of nowhere the person kind of came up to you and said, well, guess what, I'm leaving. It's almost like you were shocked, and you were kind of in denial, and and after that, you were even once like the reality set in, you were even more heartbroken because it was just so abrupt, and something that you loved so much got taken away from you that quickly. So it was hard, and not to mention, some of the girls. We always knew that Vince wasn't into the dancing concept, but slowly we hear about some of the girls being spoken to, and then, and going off. And it's almost like, somebody kind of coming in and handpicking and breaking up the family. It's like minding a business and, and kind of selling it off piece by piece. Yeah. I guess it's also kind of like somebody coming into your house, and holding like an estate sale, and the strangers coming in and taking the things that's dearest to you. I don't know. I guess I could go on forever, but I won't. But overall, the good thing about it is the relationships that we created, are still strong as ever, and memories are great. And I just wish like digital cameras and things like that were so much more, being used then as it is now, because I mean, if I had, I just wish I had way more photos than I do. Just to kind of help me with the memories and, just kind of treasure it a little bit better.
All right, Che, well, I want to thank you for joining us and sharing your memories of your time in WCW.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right. And we're back. What a great interview with Che. I'm constantly surprised how some of these people who aren't really that involved in the actual wrestling business are giving us great insight, because we had it with Spice not too long ago. We've had it with some of the referees we've spoken with, announcers, things like that, who are not as involved in the locker room, and but we're constantly getting great interviews from them.
Well, see, and here's the thing. It doesn't take and honestly, it doesn't take somebody who's been, around the game and in the ring, because the guys that are in the ring and have had a spot, and here's the way I look at it, is not only the guys that have had a spot, but, the guys that have been around are less to talk than the ones who were on the sidelines, or in the Nitro Girls cases, just kind of had a small role in the company. But if you think about it, that small role actually benefited the company in a major way, because it was able to draw in fans that might not have actually just been wrestling fans, but they saw hot girls dancing and were intrigued. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it also did a lot for them in the regard that it kept people from, number one, changing channels because they wanted to see the Nitro Girls dance. And number two, it kept those people in the arena. It kept them in the seats during the breaks, as opposed to getting up and going to get another beer, getting popcorn or whatever.
Yep, that's when you send the wife or the girlfriend.
Right, because, the girlfriends don't want to look at hot girls dancing.
Well, unless they're bisexual.
Unless you're lucky.
Oh, I thought you were going to say unless they're lesbians. I was going to say, nah, it just takes a bisexual girl.
That's what I'm saying. That's if you're lucky. But, at this point, WWE was really running strong, taking over. Steve Austin had just become champion for the first time. The Rock was running strong. Those are really the two guys that set the tone for WWF for the next couple of years. WCW really was trying to recover. This NWO storyline, it was getting stale. So what did? They split it in half. And they had the Wolfpack faction, the Babyface faction, and kept the Black and White as the heel faction. And the two groups were warring. During this time, we saw Scott Hall turn against Kevin Nash and join the heel side. Dusty Rhodes was a part of the NWO at this point. Of course, Hulk Hogan. Bret Hart was kind of with them, but he kind of wasn't. He would never wear the NWO colors, so to speak, but he would wear Hulk Hogan's shirt every week. And with this babyface group, they would get Lex Luger as part of it. They got Sting as part of it. And to me, that's one of two events that really contributed to the downfall of WCW. And granted, it was a babyface group of the NWO, but Sting joining the NWO after all the shit he went through, especially with not just Hulk Hogan, but Kevin Nash, who was now his partner in that group. It wasn't believable, and it almost felt like, it was like Larry told us earlier this week. You didn't get a good finish to that storyline.
Well, see, and that's always been a problem in wrestling, in my opinion, is you never get the full story because the crowd, either the creative or the crowd, loses interest. Like creative, for instance, you have a team of 14 to 16 guys, sometimes more, sometimes less, sitting at a table just jotting down ideas, and you figure probably for every 300 ideas that they write out, one out of those 300 actually gets used. So, you've got 299 useless ideas, and sometimes, when those guys, they veto an idea and they throw it away, somebody somebody higher up goes, well, wait, that's a great idea. And that's kind of what I think you saw with the NWO at that point was, somebody threw it away and was like, well, let's just not finish it the proper way. Let's just put him with them. Why? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the problem with WCW is that higher person had nothing to do with wrestling. He was an HR executive at Turner. And every storyline they did, as you heard in that last interview, it had to go through standards and practices. It had to make sure it was appropriate because they were a family-oriented company. Whereas WWE, the only limit was basically anything you can do on cable TV, they could do because it went through Vince McMahon. And, so the harder the storylines got, the more hardcore the storylines got, the more success that they would get. Meanwhile, WCW had to keep going through Turner's HR. I remember, we were talking about these guys earlier, but I remember hearing a story, I think it was in the Mike Graham Shoot interview, where Bill Watts was trying to get fired, and he couldn't get fired. So he was in a meeting with Ted Turner and about 5 other executives in his office, which was a 20th floor office in the Turner building in Atlanta. He walked onto his balcony and took a leak off it. That's what got him fired.
That's funny, and it kind of goes to show you that, almost anything was able to be done, and you kind of saw that with WCW was that anything they could do, they would do if they could get away with it. I mean, obviously, you have the FCC, or as I like to call them, the TV Nazis watching over you, so you could only do so much, but if you could do it, they would do it, unlike WWF at that time. WWF was, doing stuff a lot differently, in my opinion.
Yeah, any Howard Stern fan like myself knows what the FCC is capable of. But in this time, WCW was really trying hard, and they weren't that far behind because they were trading ratings victories, but they were trying whatever they could to go ahead. One thing they did in this time that really helped them along was they pushed Goldberg. Goldberg had debuted the fall before, and he was wrestling mid-carders. He was wrestling Steve McMichael, Alex Wright, guys like that. But then he became the United States champion, and there was a great match at, I think it was Spring Stampede of that year. It was a great triple threat U.S. title match with Diamond Dallas Page, Chris Benoit, and Raven, which Raven wound up winning. The very next night, Goldberg won the United States title. Ironically, that was the day of the Columbine tragedy. Or no, it was the year before, but it was April 20th, 1998. Goldberg won the United States Championship and really just ran roughshod over the company further, and he was doing this over main eventers, culminating on July 7th, where he defeated Hulk Hogan for the World Heavyweight Championship. Now, that was huge at the time because Goldberg was a rookie, and he was undefeated. And, it led into storylines he had with the Giant, had some good matches with him. Had some stuff with Chris Jericho, which turned out Chris Jericho got a lot of heat from Goldberg on that. But it all culminated at Starrcade of that year, which is actually an event that I was at where Kevin Nash defeated him. But so many other things were happening there. We had Raven running strong with the Flock and Perry Saturn not being basically leaving the group. Just so many things that happened during that year, but without a doubt, the biggest one was Goldberg.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and if you think about it, Goldberg, became a main factor in the company, throughout the rest of the company until they finally, obviously we saw the demise of the company, but he became a big mainstay.
Yeah, and, and to this day, Goldberg's still a big name. If he shows up on a wrestling show, the fans, the roof comes off the place. A few years ago, when Kurt Angle was coming into TNA, all they showed was a silhouette of someone working out. It was a bald man working out. It turned out to be Kurt Angle, but everyone thought it was going to be Goldberg. It gets to where if there's a big surprise, the name Goldberg comes up because everyone wants to see him again.
Honestly, I'm not one that wants to see him again. I'll be the first to say that. In my opinion, Goldberg was, I don't even know how to put it, Goldberg was thrown out there too soon, in my opinion. Obviously, him being a football player turned wrestler, it worked to his advantage. But if you think about it, he was overhyped, in my opinion, so to say, because for the simple fact of he really didn't have that much of a wrestling ability. I mean, cool. His matches lasted 5 minutes, and in my opinion, the reason that you would go on to see him doing these squash matches and holding a record is because of his lackability in the ring.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously I was saying a lot of fans want to see him. I'm not saying all of them, but the roof does definitely go off the place when he comes out to an event. Also this year, there's some really strange people starting to compete in matches. Bash at the Beach that year, there was the main event was Hulk Hogan and Dennis Rodman, who'd wrestled the year before, and he'd wrestled a couple times. And he was, for someone who wasn't a wrestler, he was a pretty good wrestler. Took on Diamond Dallas Page and the mailman, Karl Malone. Also in that one match, Karl Malone didn't embarrass himself, but he was by no means a Luthez-style wrestler.
Oh my God! That match was so horrible. My dog just died. Actually, honestly, WCW. See, and that's also where WCW set a trend for nowadays, in my opinion. Because you look at nowadays, and you've got companies like TNA and WWE are using Jersey Shore people who are reality TV guys. Karl Malone, obviously being an NBA player, and Dennis Rodman, obviously being an NBA player. They kind of took that and they drew that kind of a crowd from NBA and tried to turn them into wrestling fans, which at that point in day, you did not see that a lot. I mean, obviously WWF brought in, guys like Lawrence Taylor and people like that, but you didn't see them utilize it to the advantage, and WCW did, because look at where Dennis Rodman ended up being. He became a mainstay for a little while.
Yeah, and this was just a few months after WWF brought in Mike Tyson for WrestleMania, and these things were making national news. They were being highlights of these matches. The nights they occurred were being shown on SportsCenter, which was unheard of, because mainstream sports has never reported wrestling news. The only exception to that was shortly after the Chris Benoit tragedy. Almost any time a wrestler who's not at least 60 years old dies, that gets reported because they kind of think it's all connected. But and the reason I say that match wasn't as terrible is because I'm thinking of the next month, where the celebrity who took place in a match was the Chin, Jay Leno.
The Chin, holy crap!
Yeah. Now Jay Leno, me being a TV guy and researching a lot of this stuff, is someone I don't have a lot of love for, but this was just a terrible match. It was terrible. It was Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff against DDP and Jay Leno. At one point in this match, Jay Leno had an armbar on Hulk Hogan, and I think he had it on him for like 3 minutes.
Well, and honestly, there's a reason for that, and I hate to say it, but the reason for that is just because he didn't have a wrestling ability, and a move like an armbar or a hammerlock is easy to put on compared to putting on a full Nelson or doing a suplex, and it's a lot safer for the simple fact of, if you look at it, there's less risk. What's the worst that's going to happen if somebody has him in an armbar? He might pop the arm out of a socket, as to where if he gave a suplex, the potential of danger is a lot higher, because the guy could sit there and, if he did it wrong, he could freaking 1, break the guy's neck, 2, dislocate the guy's shoulder, 3, hurt himself.
Well, and I've heard from several people, and I guess you can attest this more than I can, that you could, if you twist too hard on a hammerlock, you could very easily break someone's arm. Is that true?
Yeah. Honestly, it just depends on how hard you wrench it. And, the problem with a lot of rookies or, guys that haven't been in the business, so to say, is they don't know their own strength. In wrestling, you kind of get to learn your own strength. Hey, if I hit this person a little too hard, I know what it can do. And, hey, I might just utilize that to my advantage down the road. But, a guy who's still green or has never wrestled like Jay Leno, he could definitely injure somebody just with a wrist lock, but it's probably one of the least dangerous moves that he could have attempted.
Now, having said that, as terrible as that match was, they started that with a really great setup, and it was actually on an episode of The Tonight Show where Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff actually took over the Tonight Show. Eric Bischoff kind of manhandled Jay Leno and threw him out of there. Jay Leno came in with security and Diamond Dallas Page, and basically a brawl ensued. Now, seeing that on an episode of The Tonight Show in 1998, that was huge, for wrestling.
It was, honestly. And, to a point, I think that WCW on a lot of things was ahead of their time because, nowadays I don't think you would see something like that. But at the same time, it would be good for ratings for, any company that did it. But it's just what company could sit there and convince a huge network like that to let them do that.
Now, the one other thing I want to touch on this year from 1998 is, we know currently the tag team wrestling industry is dead, but in 1998 it was still going. There was a lot of good tag teams, especially in WCW, even though they were starting to break them up. And they broke up who I feel was one of their better tag teams and definitely one of their long-lasting tag teams, and that's the Harlem Heat, because Stevie Ray, he turned and joined the NWO. Again, that was the common theme over the years. Someone turns, they go to the NWO. I don't know your memories of Harlem Heat or if you had any thoughts on that, but that was a team that I always really admired, especially going back to the old Global stuff that was on ESPN and things like that.
Harlem Heat was actually one of my favorite teams. I remember wanting to be like Booker T for a while, honestly.
It's ironic at this point because when they first came in WCW, they were Kane and Cole, so there was a Kane before Kane.
Yeah, that's very true. And honestly, if you think about it, with the Harlem Heat, they did a lot of stuff that, at that time, once again, it was ahead of their time because, you didn't see guys doing a lot of how do I want to put this, showboating, so to say. Like they were guys that would showboat and at the same time would go in there and get the job done, actually. And not only that, but you get a lot of outrageous promos out of them, including the one that's on YouTube of them with, if I'm not mistaken, it's Miss Elizabeth and Mean Gene Okerlund's interviewing him, and they're talking about how they're going to go after Hulk Hogan. And during that promo, if you recall, Booker T ends up calling Hogan the N-word.
Yeah, he did say that, and that was actually on the Classics on Demand recently, and they edited it out, obviously. But yeah, that was pretty entertaining when you think about it. I was watching it, and I was like, did Booker T just say the N-word about Hulk Hogan? But at the beginning of 1999, we talked a few minutes ago about how Kevin Nash beat Goldberg for the title. That was a great match. I actually thought they were starting to pull their way out of that because the other event that I felt really started that downward spiral was Halloween Havoc of 98. Where the main event started at about 11 o'clock. The cable systems took it off the air. WCW, in their infinite arrogance, just assumed that they would stay with it till their event was over, and that didn't happen. I remember that. I happened to be on one of the cable systems that stayed with it, but they pretty much had to give that match to all the fans on Nitro for free the next night.
That's actually kind of because I don't remember that, but that is hilarious. Obviously, if you're going to go against a big network and do a pay-per-view, you bought a time slot. So if they don't have something after that, they're going to charge you more. But obviously, they had something after that, and they cut the pay-per-view.
Well, I remember a lot of them, it was just blank air. They didn't pay for that extra 20 minutes or whatever, so they took them off. So it seemed like some of these cable companies were trying to muscle Ted Turner, which is kind of a funny idea for a cable system. But at the beginning of the next year, the infamous finger poke of doom took place, where Hulk Hogan, who had announced his retirement, came back for one night because they were going to have a rematch with Kevin Nash and Goldberg. Goldberg got arrested and just really looked really silly. So Hulk Hogan took his place, poked Nash in the chest, and he fell and basically took the fall for him, reuniting the two NWO groups. Also, that happened to be the night that Mick Foley as Mankind won the title on WWF television. That was taped, and that was I think that was the last time where they gave away the events. But in this case, it was Tony Schiavone, who always kind of stayed on the level there, but made some kind of snide comments towards Mick Foley that night, and really kind of that kind of affected their company there.
No, I would agree with you on that completely.
And finally, one of the other interesting events of this time is Rey Mysterio Jr. losing his mask in a match against the NWO, in a match where Kevin Nash and Lex Luger's hair would be on the line against Rey Mysterio Jr.'s mask. He's put it back on since he came to WWE, but I know you're really in tune with the Mexican lucha libre style, and if I'm not mistaken, putting that mask back on is almost like an insult to the heritage of the mask. Is that right?
That is correct, and honestly, taking the mask off in the first place is a sign of disrespect. Getting the mask in the first place is a sign of honor. So when you take the mask off, it's kind of like slapping somebody in the face.
Now, in Mexico, they do have a lot of mask versus hair matches, if I'm not mistaken, but the fact that this didn't take place in a lucha libre style match, because they were also removing masks off a lot of people at this time. Psychosis, Juventud Guerrera lost their masks over the course of that year. The other event that took place with Eddie Guerrero, and it was really kind of a tragedy. He almost lost his life in a car accident on New Year's Eve, 1998. Apparently, from the stories that are told in a documentary, Vicky Guerrero told the story that they were telling him he was going to have full amnesia. He was going to have to learn how to walk again. He was going to have to learn his life all over again. And wrestling was out of the picture. But he made a miraculous recovery, and he came back about 6 months later. A lot of people kind of think that the reason he came back so early and he medicated himself again contributed to his early death.
And honestly, I don't know if that would contribute to it as much as, steroids, so to say, because obviously he died of an enlarged heart, and an enlarged heart, yeah, it can be from stress and stuff and probably from, past things. But when you're doing roids, you're putting pressure on your heart, and all it's doing is making it to where it just clogs up. And what happens is basically it swells up to where it's like 3 times the size, and then it just it's done, and that's pretty much what happened to him. So I don't know if I would say as much as his injury had to do with it as much as years of roid use off and on.
Yeah. Also in this time, a couple of new wrestlers debuted. David Flair started wrestling, and one wrestler that kind of caught a lot of attention was the Maestro, and we have a pre-recorded interview with him right now, so we'll go ahead and get to it.
All right, and on the line with us at this time, we actually have a former WCW star, the Maestro of Wrestling. Of course, he is on the line with us right now. How you doing, Stro?
Great. How are you guys?
I'm doing wonderful, man. Now, we're talking about, of course, WCW. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of the demise of the company, and we've got a few questions for you. If you don't mind, let's go ahead and get started.
Oh, let's go.
Now, how did you initially get involved with WCW?
Well, at the time I was touring for Puerto Rico for WWC with Carlos Colon, and when Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage contacted me about working for the company, in which I flew up to Wonder Nitros and had a meeting with them and Eric Bischoff about possibility of working for the company. But at the time, I guess things, the negotiations kind of fell through at that time, so I went back to doing tours and, wrestled in Mexico and around the U.S., etc. And then I got the call again from WCW to come back for another tryout, which I had a tryout match with Chavo Guerrero Jr., which was a big honor itself because, I'm very well the Guerrero family, and I couldn't ask for anybody better to have a tryout match with. So we had a great match, and I remember, Eric singing the praises of the match and saying, "Welcome aboard." And as soon as he said that, walked out the door, and there's, Dallas Page, Arn Anderson, everybody shaking my hand, welcoming me aboard the company, and that was it.
What are some of your fondest memories from your time that you had in WCW?
Well, it was just like, it was really hard to really have a bad match with anybody because you had the creme of talents from like all parts of the world. I mean, you had the luchadors from Mexico, you had the great Japanese wrestlers, and the great scientific wrestlers from Europe and so forth, and great talent from Canada and parts of the U.S. So I mean, it was really hard to not have a good match with anybody. And yet, I mean, being there with legends like Ric Flair, Terry Funk, Roddy Piper, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, and to the great junior heavyweights at the time, like you had Chris Jericho, Eddie Guerrero, Psychosis, Ciclope, Rey Mysterio, Dean Malenko, and then the list goes on. I mean, it was just being part of at one time one of the biggest, if not the biggest, wrestling promotion in the world. I mean, it was a fantastic deal, and getting to have the feuds that I had, with the Bagwells, the Flairs, and the Ernest the Cat Millers was, it was great.
Great. Was there any one experience that you had there in your time in WCW that just really kind of upset you and made you say, enough of this?
Well, of course, with any promotion, you'll have your highs and lows, and there are confusing times. I mean, there are times towards the end there towards the end of my run, rather, where, it's like we had a card set up, but it changed like 5 or 6 different times before we even got out to the ring and to perform. So a lot of us were standing outside the locker room going, okay, what's next? But, we did like what we felt we had to do. We made an omelet with a few eggs, and we made the best of what was given to us. And like I've iterated before, you can ask for a better talent roster than we had. It was great, and I mean, for myself too, to be part of the great angle I did with Ernest the Cat Miller, involved in one of the greatest performers in all of entertainment, Godfather Soul James Brown. I mean, that was epic in itself. So, but it was a confusion at the time. We had different bosses once every 2 weeks, it seems like, and it's like every boss wanted to do something different than the one before, and it was a lot of. The office was kind of chaotic at the time because there was no cohesiveness, working together more or less, and us being the talent that we were just given the stuff and try to make the best of. So, but if the office were been worked more as a unit, I think WCW would have been much better off in the long term.
Yeah, definitely. Now, a lot of these interviews we do, we ask for like a rib or a road story. Do you have like a funny locker room or road story from your time there in WCW?
Oh yes. Oh, most definitely. I got quite a few actually. One guy, one great legend. I swear I would adopt some uncle if I could. Terry Funk brought this chicken one time. He started comparing his anatomy to that of one Ric Flair at one of the events that we did, and I remember we were all falling out laughing, and Terry, see these legs, see this nose, see this skin, this is Ric Flair, and I'm going to take Ric Flair by the neck and whip him like the dog that he is. I mean, he's beating the chicken on the ground, and we're all howling laughing. It was great, and then I remember. Getting back to the hotel that night, and the bellboy was running around with this same trash bag. And I asked him, I said, what are you doing? And he's like, this guy gave me this dead chicken, and I don't know what to do with it. Of course, it was Terry. But yeah, many great times, man. It was just it was great being part of the locker rooms and veterans and legends to the great athletes that were a part of WCW at one point. So I was just happy to be part of WCW when it was at its pinnacle.
Now, you actually left when your contract expired in 2000. Of course, the promotion was around until early 2001. And, obviously every company has some issues. What are some of the problems you saw during your time in WCW, and did that influence your decision, any of those influence your decision to not re-sign with WCW?
Well, the company was bleeding financially at one point. I remember I remember talking to Ric Flair one time, and he was looking at some of the stuff, some of the figures in the book that one of the local promoters gave him at the time, and I remember him shaking his head, going, "My God, what are they doing?" and it was just bad decisions. Pretty much the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing, and it was it was sad in a lot of ways because especially when we had the merger, the Time Warner and AOL, which they were not really, their interests weren't really wrestling oriented. So a lot of factors came in that were against its WCW survival. On top of that, which was a shame because at one time he had the best talent in the entire world. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better roster and everything. And it was just if WWE hadn't bought out WCW, I mean, it would have crumbled anyway. I mean, it was in the downward spiral, but it was just one of those things where it did the backing and the office kind of fell through, and that was that.
So you just talked about some of the financial peril the company was in. Obviously, that was one of the main contributors. But was there one event that you can look at and say that you think that kind of began the demise of WCW?
Well, there was a lot of bad decisions. I mean, they were trying to bring entertainers at the time, but like David Arquette and so forth. But when they started degrading the championships, especially the WCW World Title, by giving it to the non-wrestling personnel, I mean, it's when you degrade your top prize, I mean, it takes the notoriety out of it, not just for the wrestlers, but for the fans itself, because I mean that's the thing we all strive for, is to be heavyweight champion of the world, right? So, nothing against the great entertainers that came in. I mean, like David Arquette, for example, was a great guy and gave a lot to charity and everything. He was great to all of us. It was just bad decisions by the office and by the people running the ship at the time, and which is sad because I mean, it could have been greater, even greater, and it could have been still in existence today if we had our stuff shipped together, more or less.
Oh, what do you feel was the best storyline that you were ever a part of in WCW?
Well, hands down, the angle that got the most notoriety would have to have been the one where it's Cat Miller. Without a doubt, shadow of a doubt, and it could have been even bigger. There were plans to bring in more entertainers even after James Brown and so forth. I mean, the feud I had with David Flair was going to eventually lead to a feud with his father, Ric Flair. But that, like a lot of great angles and great storylines that were planned, they fell through the cracks between the different bosses and different, members of management that came in and out, But, but I would have to say the one of all the feuds I had in WCW, the one with the most notoriety had to have been the one against Cat Miller. I mean, it was a very entertaining feud, no doubt, and Ernest, he's a very entertaining guy, legit 3-time kickboxing world karate champion anyway, excuse me. And so it was great. It was a great feud to be a part of, and I'm glad I got the notoriety it did, and it could have got more notoriety, you say, if, the company were still around.
Now, what do you miss the most about WCW?
Well, I think what I miss most about WCW and what not just wrestlers but fans, I missed the heritage, stretching back to the old NWA and so forth. That guys like Flair and Dusty Rhodes and the Andersons, and that generation paved way for the rest of us to carry on. You had rich in heritage, WCW had, and its ties with the NWA. So that itself what made me a fan of WCW and wanted me to originally be a part of WCW, was that rich WCW/NWA heritage that I had, and being a part of it, being in the same company with the greats like Terry Funk, Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan. I mean, the list goes on. It was just it was a dream come true, and something I always will cherish the rest of my life.
Okay, Stro. Well, I just want to thank you for joining us today, and thanks for all the years of entertainment.
All right, thank you.
All right, and we are back here on the WCW Tribute Radio Show. That was such a great interview with the Maestro. But, at this point, WCW was really in a recovery phase. They're just trying to recover from all these problems that they're having. They were having they turned Hulk Hogan back to the red and yellow. But, really the big thing that kind of put the nail in the coffin was the beginning of the Vince Russo era. And it wasn't so much the Vince Russo era to begin himself, although that was part of it. But a large part of that was that they came in with him and Eric Bischoff again, and basically they tried to tell us fans that everything that had happened in WCW didn't exist. I believe at one point it was thrown around that previous WCW history was a dream, and this was what was actually happening. We were seeing guys like Mike Awesome come in from ECW, walk away from them. We were seeing just a lot of really kind of weird things that were happening. Mike Awesome is that 70s guy I especially remember. And of course, they'd always go back to that NWO angle, starring Jeff Jarrett and Bret Hart as saying the band is back together, kind of starting with the what they were called in TNA last year, just the band. And we'd see things like Hacksaw Duggan kind of going going into the garbage and pulling out that belt. Just a lot of things just didn't seem to make a lot of sense at this point. They were really grasping at straws. And the one good storyline that they did have in that era was the New Blood. It was the series of young guys going up, the Vampiros, the Billy Kidmans, Shane Douglas, guys like that. Going up against the established superstars, the Millionaires Club, your Diamond Dallas Page, Ric Flair, Sting, Hulk Hogan, which was really interesting because we got to see Shane Douglas versus Ric Flair a couple times around then, and everyone knows what kind of heat they have.
Yeah, they have a lot of heat. But, they have a lot of heat, and you see it in the shoot interviews. So it was rare to be able to see that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and, really another event that really kind of cemented that WCW was on its way out. And this is David Arquette winning the WCW Championship. Of course, it was pretty much a vehicle to promote Ready to Rumble, but if you're going to promote that movie, there's probably better ways to do it than have an actor win. And this is the title that came from the NWA title. This is the title that goes back to 1905, and George Hackenschmidt and Bronco Nagurski, Dusty Rhodes, all these guys held this belt. Of course, Colt Cabana currently holds that belt, so take it however you want.
And you kind of bring up, that it wasn't probably the smartest idea for the company. What do you personally feel, and before I get to my, what I feel it was, what do you personally feel would have been better for the company in that angle to promote the movie?
I have no idea. I guess I can't say that it was wrong, but but if he won a different championship, that might be different. But you're looking at the World Heavyweight Championship, and at that time, the World Heavyweight Championship meant something. I've always said that a company is as strong as the guy that's carrying them, and if David Arquette's carrying your wrestling company, that's a problem, especially when you still had Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan and Diamond Dallas Page and Sting and guys like that around. And I believe he actually won it from Diamond Dallas Page. But you had all these young guys. You could have given it to one of these young guys, these Vampiros, who they were starting to push really hard. Jerry Toot, the Wall, was really starting to come up. Not that I would think that he would win the world title, but just a lot of he was a guy who really went hard there for a while, and obviously went too hard because he's not with us anymore. And I do want to say that my comment a moment ago was not meant to bash Colt Cabana. It was simply of the point that he's not on the level of a Harley Race or a Dusty Rhodes or a Ric Flair, but he's definitely a very, very deserving wrestler.
Yeah, no, and here's the thing. In my opinion, you did kind of say to a point that it would have been better if they had put a different belt on him. Honestly, why didn't they have some of the real wrestlers in the movie that were actual wrestlers more involved in the angle, and instead of giving the belt to David Arquette, give the belt to one of them and have Arquette manage them?
Yeah, I mean, we saw Prince IK in that movie. He didn't get involved in that. Obviously, he wasn't at that level. But we saw main eventers, Sid Vicious, even Perry Saturn.
Yeah. Guys that were on the level to get a shot like that were basically put on the side burner so that David Arquette could hold a title. And honestly, it was probably in his contract that he would get to hold a belt, but that's not smart for your company.
Yeah, that's a TNA-style contract, really, because that's what they put in their new contracts. But, another group that came along at this time was a tag team called the Mamalukes, but of course they would tell everyone interviewing them that they were called the Paisans, and that consisted of Johnny the Bull and Big Vito, who they didn't only win the tag team championships, but they were co-hardcore champions in WCW as well. So we actually have an interview with Big Vito that we're going to go ahead and get to right now. And we are back on the WCW Tribute Radio Show. We are joined now by a former WCW Tag Team Champion, one of the very few WCW Hardcore Champions, and a member of the Paisans. Please don't call them the Mamalukes. We are joined by Big Vito. Big Vito, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, and it's good to be here talking about WCW, the good old days, the Mamalukes, Johnny the Bull, Disco Inferno, and then whoever else you put in front of me, because I am the Pavarotti of hard shots to the body. That Paisan who's got it going on. That fly Italian guy from SI. I'm the Mac Daddy of the Mac Daddies. I'm too buff, rough, and tough. I got the stuff. My name ain't Buff. My name is Big Vito LaGrasso from Staten Island, New York, and I got 2 words for you. If you step forward, I'm going to kick your face in. Now hit this interview.
All right, so we got some great questions, so we're going to go ahead and get started now.
So go ahead and roll.
All right, now this is JT Evans. Now my first question for you is, how did you initially get started with WCW?
With WCW?
Yeah.
Well, here's how it went. I was, working for ECW at the time, and WCW was looking for grade A top talent, like #1 draft choices. They've been monitoring me in ECW, and when the time is right and they thought they had a spot for me, they gave me a call. They said, "Yo, V, what you been doing?" So work with the ECW. Would you like to come to the major networks and work for WCW? Turn the network. I said, sure. You got a spot? We got a spot for you. All right. Listen, we're going to send these papers. Don't tear them up. You got to sign them. Get one of your lawyer friends from the Paisan University to look at them. Send them back, and we got a deal. I said, no problem. So I sent them in, and before you know it, I was with Johnny the Bull and the Mamalukes.
Now, of course, you were a part of the Mamalukes, but what are some of your fondest memories during your time at WCW?
Well, I tell you, being around those guys back then, it was my first time in prime time, and just the fact that I was going to be there with Ric Flair, Sting, Hogan, and Booker T, Haku was there, Bam Bam Bigelow, Shane Douglas, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit. I mean, you're talking about the most talented guys in wrestling that, I was a part of. And I remember going there my first day in Denver, Colorado. I drove around the building 2 times, and the first guy I came across was Sting. And I introduced myself, and I was real nervous, and, but walking in there, I already had been 10 years in the business, but still walking into a company like that, to them guys, I was kind of like, they knew who I was, but I was still like unproven talent, And then the one thing I was happy about is I said, man, I'm not going to have to get hit with chairs no more. I'm not going to have to do no more hardcore. I'm out of ECW. The first night, what did they do? Me and Johnny got whacked out by chairs by Haku. So I was like, man, I can't get away from this stuff. But, I mean, the great times I had in there was just being part of that, working for Turner, being part of WCW, being able to work with, on the pay-per-views, the Great American Bash, Bash the Beach, Halloween Havoc. I can't say enough about the history of WCW, me being part of it, and then me being able to work with the greats in the business and really, really coming out of my shell and making a name for myself as a tag team wrestler and a singles wrestler. And that, and then when it came time to really throw down and I had to be a hardcore wrestler, I mean, I worked with the legendary Terry Funk, who's a Hall of Famer in my book, and, did me one of the greatest favors of all time, and, I got to wrestle him, and, beating Terry Funk on Nitro, for the hardcore title, legit, I mean, was a great honor and a great privilege, and I'll never forget it, and it was the highlight of my highlight of my WCW career, because it was like a coming out party for me.
Now, obviously, with every company, there's issues backstage. What are some of the issues you saw within the company during your time there?
Well, I tell you what, being a new guy up there and, being fresh in the politics business, and you talk about all that, you kind of observe and you kind of looked and you watched, and, when you had a time to speak, you spoke. When you didn't have a time to speak, you kept your mouth shut, and, you're talking about dealing with guys up there who have been, I mean, I've wrestled the best guys. I mean, I wrestled Scott Steiner, Jeff Jarrett, Booker T, Kevin Nash, main event on Nitro, Terry Funk. I wrestled against Ric Flair on pay-per-view, Lex Luger. I was in a battle royal with every one of them guys, Dallas Page, Hulk Hogan. I made my way through the ranks in WCW to be one of the top baby faces of that company. And I remember opening up a magazine one day, and there's one page, there's me, and on the other side, in the middle of the magazine, there's The Rock in WWE. I mean, that's how high I went. I was up there, 1-2 with those guys, and Johnny the Bull and I being the Mamalukes, a tag team, and being one of the better tag teams in WCW. I'll never say we were the greatest tag team or we were the best. We were the best. We were good for what? We were a good tag team. We never got enough steam going. And for the people today, they still ask, hey, when are the Mamalukes coming back? And I take a lot of pride in saying, hopefully one day, that can happen.
Now,
okay.
Now, Vito, having said that, what do you feel caused the demise of WCW?
There was a lot of Chiefs and no Indians. Period. At the end.
What do you miss the most about WCW?
Say that again?
What do you miss the most about WCW?
That WCW is closed. I mean, because it gives everybody a chance to work the competition. And being part of WCW, there's a lot of guys who have jobs, and being that so few jobs right now in wrestling for full-time wrestlers, if there was another wrestling company like WCW out there to go along with TNA, it would be WWE, WCW, and it would be TNA, and TNA would take the place of ECW. So, I mean, and if, when ECW closed, I mean, that was another brand that closed, but it was a different kind of wrestling that people appreciated. And, ECW, I think, got the short end of the stick sometimes, but we were innovative. We were something that people wanted to watch. We were an alternative, just like, WCW was. And, the WWE. I mean, nothing beats Saturday night, 6:05 TBS. And I've been on plenty of those matches.
Now, in your time in WCW, what do you feel was the best storyline that you were part of?
Oh, wow. I mean, me and Johnny the Bull, we did a lot of good tag team stuff. I mean, we had a lot of vignettes. We had a lot of good stuff. I mean, I can't really pinpoint what was good and what wasn't good. I mean, of course, being hardcore champion, was great. Was a great run for me as singles. I think I gained a lot of momentum after I lost the title, because I'll never forget the first night after I lost the title, and I went out there, people were chanting my name, and they were going crazy in the building, and everybody was just standing there with their mouths open like, what the hell's going on here? And I had really taken the fans and really got over with my wrestling ability, and it was something that I earned, and I went through, the tag team ranks, and I went through the hardcore, and then when I made my way through the singles, I mean, they had me up for a U.S. title shot. I mean, they had me, who knows, maybe if some way, somehow, I always said, Big Vito is a good hardcore wrestler, he's a great tag team wrestler, could have been a U.S. champion, in the right situation, in the right time, the right place. I mean, I could have been a world champion. Who knows? You know what I mean? But, I mean, at that time, anything could have been great. I mean, I was on top of the world, I mean, just because I was wrestling for WCW. I'll never say a bad thing about it, because it was an experience. My experience in the big time. And just like I was in ECW, and now, that was a stepping stone for me to go on to greater and better things. My time in TNA, that led to me going to WWE, and going to WWE and, being a product of going through the ranks, and a lot of people forget that I started out in the WWF.
Now, this question is, you're one of the select few wrestlers to actually be in WCW during those last few weeks. And the last few weeks, from everyone we've talked to, were pretty rough there. No one kind of knowing what the future of the company was like. What was the locker room atmosphere like for you in those last few weeks?
I just have to say one word: uncertainty. That's really, that's the really best way to describe it.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, Vito.
Hey, listen, fellas, thank you very much for having me on False Count Radio. It's always a pleasure to be on your radio show. If you can, I'm always on Facebook. You guys can check me out on onewrestling.com. If you need to book Big Vito, go to Vito Bookings at yahoo.com, or you can go to Vito J. LaGrasso at AOL.com. I'm always out there. I do plenty of charity work. I'm always doing stuff in the community. So if you catch Big Vito, catch him soon, catch him quick, and hopefully we'll get to catch him back on TV real soon. Thank you very much, False Count Radio, for having me tonight.
Thank you. And we are back. What a great interview that was with Big Vito. We tried kind of hard to get him, and, he was worth the wait.
For sure. Big Vito always gives a good interview, especially when we're talking about such a topic that is so close to him as WCW. I mean, if you think that's where he initially made the biggest mark for his career was in WCW before obviously going into the WWE and wearing a dress.
Yeah, and a lot of people actually forget that he was in ECW for a lot of years before that. That's how he got there. So, but we're going to go ahead and finish this off. We're going to talk about the last few months of WCW, which were very pathetic to watch, and I was very upset about that, because going back, I was always a big WCW guy. In fact, I shared an apartment with a friend who was into wrestling too, and he'd keep asking me, "Why are we watching WCW when Raw is on?" And this is when the great storyline is Kurt Angle was coming out. The Rock was going crazy, and Steve Austin was just coming back. A great WrestleMania actually occurred right after the purchase of WCW. But starting in 2001, they started renaming their events. We started seeing things like James Brown come out on pay-per-views. Ernest Miller really started getting pushing. There also was some, I wouldn't say tragedy because he's okay now, but the first thing that I remember seeing that just makes you go, ooh, is in the pay-per-view called Sin, which was their January pay-per-view that year. Sid Vicious had probably one of the most nastiest injuries that has ever happened in wrestling. He took a jump off the middle rope, and his leg basically snapped in half. It looked like it was hanging from like a piece of a tendon almost, and it was pretty nasty. And JT, I don't think we've ever talked about this, but as a worker, especially now, what's your opinion? What do you think when you see that?
Oh, honestly, I've watched that video a couple times, and it gave me the chills, and it made me cringe.
Well, and what a lot of people don't realize is that was a triple threat match, I believe, and I don't think Jeff Jarrett was paying attention because he hooked that leg.
Really? See, I did not notice that, and that had to have been painful.
Right. I mean, unless it's like a gunshot where they say when you get a gunshot, you don't feel it for like 10 minutes. But just imagine if Jeff Jarrett hooked that leg with any kind of force, he probably could have ripped that piece of that leg off.
Yeah, luckily most of the time when you hook somebody's leg for a pin, you don't really hook back too far. So I'm sure it didn't hurt him too bad or didn't, make the injury too much worse. But still, that had to hurt because I'm sure that he felt the snap when he came down on it. But then again, who the fuck in their right mind that's a big guy like him is going to come off the ropes for a fucking big boot? Dumb.
Yeah, to be fair, it was the middle rope. He didn't come off the top, but still, yeah. But at this point, really, we knew that they were on their way out. Scott Hall and Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, Diamond Dallas Page and Kevin Nash formed a team called the Insiders. And it was just at this point they were in the mode where they were just waiting to see what would happen. They knew they were going to get bought, and we've heard all these interviews today where we didn't. A lot of people didn't know what was going to happen, and we heard Larry Zbyszko, like we were talking about earlier, say that he thinks that they would still be in business if it wasn't for Time Warner. We saw the Team Canada group with Lance Storm and actually Jim Duggan turning against the country and joining them, which didn't really seem to make a lot of sense. Booker T really started coming into his own at this time and that was one of the good things at the end there. Booker T became the superstar that he is now. Scott Steiner started winning championships as well. We saw Ric Flair kind of getting involved with Dusty Rhodes. And you were talking earlier about guys like Mike Sanders, Sean O'Haire, and Mark Jindrak. And guys like Sean O'Haire and Mark Jindrak, they had a little bit of a run in WWE. Mike Sanders never got that opportunity. And, I always thought the Natural Born Thrillers was one of the best groups out there. They had that entertaining catchphrase, and a lot of the guys that were in it were pretty good. You had Sean Stasiak kind of playing off of Kurt Hennig. Just really a great team. But, at this time they also kind of they knocked Goldberg away for what turned out to be the rest of WCW's time. But, do you have any other opinions on those last few weeks there?
Honestly, not really. I remember watching the Natural Born Thrillers and thinking that they were the future of wrestling, and it kind of sucks to see guys like that had such great potential, get the shaft like they did. I mean, honestly, I feel that they didn't get the time that was deserved. I mean, it was a good team. All the guys in the team had charisma. They all were able to wrestle. A lot of them were really good, as to where if you look at nowadays, a lot of the guys they bring in, especially like WWE nowadays, a lot of the guys they try to push are horrible fucking wrestlers. But you've got guys like, Mike Sanders, Sean O'Haire, Mark Jindrak, people like that. Reno, whatever happened to fucking Reno? Do you remember that guy?
Yeah, he was great. He was even with Big Vito and Johnny the Bull for a little bit, too.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, guys like that are what should be pushed in wrestling, not these guys that, just because they fucking are the son of somebody, they're going to get a shot. Honestly, in my opinion, not anybody can be a professional wrestler. It takes a certain breed of a human being to be a wrestler, and those guys had it. But nowadays, it just kind of seems like it's not what you can do or your athletic ability. It's kind of who you know, and it kind of sucks because a lot of the guys that actually have talent don't get an actual shot like they should.
Right, or if they're in a group like WWE, they're not really getting pushed like they should. A guy like John Morrison is who I think of when I think of something like that. But, this was all leading up to what our friend Jay called Black Wednesday the other day. That was the day that Vince McMahon bought WCW, and he owned it all. So that was actually very epic, and the stories from the locker room are that Vince has never once bragged about buying up WCW and winning that war. But you got to think that he probably when he went home and with Linda and the family, he had to be he probably popped the top off a bottle of champagne that night.
See, but here's the thing, okay? The problem with him, if he had gone home and bragged about it, is technically he really didn't win. And the reason I say that he really didn't win is for the simple fact of if he really won that war, then his ratings would be higher than they are.
Yeah, they would have consolidated the two audiences.
Exactly.
But do you know what he bought that company for?
No, and I'm pretty sure I'd probably shit myself if I knew. It was probably a lot of money.
It was something like $3 million. It was like nothing.
Wow. See, and somebody like that, for him, that's like toilet paper to us. I mean, honestly, that's like, how everyone thinks gas prices are high. To him, gas prices are like, fuck, here's $1 million, just fill my tank. You know what I mean? Like, it's nothing. So for him to have spent $3 million, fuck, he was probably like, man, I can wipe my ass with $3 million.
And then there's wrestlers who have said on Shooting Reason things like, if I knew how much he bought it for, I would have bought it.
See?
Chris Jericho was one. He's like, I would have kept that company in business, and I would have run it the right way. Obviously I don't think he's much of a leader, but, just that wrestlers were like, if I had known that, I would have done that. But, and it all, there was limbo for a few days, and you'll hear in our last interview in a few minutes, that there was thinking that they were going to keep WCW going. This is the, March 26th, today, 10 years ago, the final Nitro. And this was epic because it was also at the spring breakout where they had where they did it at Panama Beach, which this Nitro, the one characteristic of this episode of Nitro every year, somebody went in the pool, and it was usually Kevin Nash or someone. It was a big guy that went in, probably because that's a little bit deeper, and if you throw a guy like the Giant in there, he can just stand up in it. But on this episode of Nitro, it was really the Night of Champions. Ironic that they unveiled a new championship that night. Of course, we had a World Heavyweight Championship match with Booker T and Scott Steiner, title for title, United States for World Championship. So Booker T closed out as the last champion, which to me is pretty epic, being the last champion there. You had the Cruiserweight title that was on the line. Shane Helms kept that going. Sean O'Haire and Chuck Palumbo, they came in and they defended their tag team titles against Lance Storm and Mike Awesome, as well as Sean Stasiak and the late Bam Bam Bigelow. Sean Stasiak had just left that group, and they unveiled the Cruiserweight tag team titles with Kidman and Rey Mysterio winning those. Now, those never came to WWE because Rey Mysterio didn't come to WWE for another year or so. His Time Warner contract expired first. But like I was saying earlier, the main event was the match that opened the first night. That was on the first Nitro, Ric Flair versus Sting. And what I remember about that is Ric Flair was in such bad shape he had to wear a shirt during that match.
That's actually kind of funny.
Yeah, so I mean he was in terrible shape. But a lot of people didn't know what was going to happen to WCW, and the story always goes that you'd have everyone was doing their job that night. Jimmy Hart was there doing what he did, and so on and so forth. But standing behind them was someone who worked for WWE. There's a famous image that I've seen of Jimmy Hart doing production that night with Bruce Pritchard standing behind him and watching what he's doing.
Yeah, and see, honestly, for the guys in WCW, I'm sure it was probably, nerve-wracking to know that they had guys breathing down their necks the whole time they were doing that.
Yeah, and now WWE has a lot of people who are still there from that group. For instance, Booker T's there. I mean, we went to TNA for a couple of years, but Booker T came from there. They did that Invasion angle. Arn Anderson and Johnny Ace are two of the most trusted backstage guys in the company. So a lot of these guys really have really been people that WWE's depended on over the last few years. And me personally, I'm a huge Arn Anderson mark. So anytime I can see him on TV, I'm a pretty happy guy. But really, it kind of led to that invasion angle that was not very good. It lasted a few months, and anyone out there, I suggest checking out Jim Cornette's guest booker, because he did a great way that he would have booked that invasion storyline that started from WrestleMania that following week to WrestleMania of the following year. He had to set aside for that one year storyline. But that's about it for WCW. Me personally, this is the promotion that I loved. It was I spent most of my childhood down here in Virginia, so going back to the NWA, it was the hometown promotion. And our arena here was one of the biggest, one of WCW's biggest arenas. It was almost like their Madison Square Garden. I remember in 1988 seeing the Road Warriors do the famous turn on Dusty Rhodes, jabbing the spike in his eye. I was in the crowd for that.
Really?
Yeah. So, I guess that's about it. I mean, did you have any final thoughts on WCW there, JT?
Not really. Honestly, I don't really have much to say about WCW. I mean, it came, we saw it, it's gone, and pretty much now YouTube and obviously, unfortunately, the WWE library are the places we can watch it.
Yeah, and obviously I'm paying them that money every month, like $8 a month. But to any fans who really like the old promotions, the old WCW, even the old WWF, even AWA, World Class, that service is a very good. It has a lot of that. I mean, every month they have different episodes from that era, from the Monday Night War era. Actually, almost every week they do. So that's a little cheap plug for them there. Hopefully they're listening and they can send me a little credit on my cable bill. But and it's just depressing to me because without them there was no competition. And granted, it took a few years for the business to get a little more stale, but it happened, and it's not so good right now. I kind of wish there was a WCW around now who had these big stars and could pull up with good storyline and still fill their arenas.
Yeah, honestly, WCW was good to a point, but at the same time, there was always something missing in WCW, but that's kind of just to be said with every company, so to say, is that there's always going to be something missing in wrestling.
Now, what did you, just one more question, because I talked earlier about what I felt it was, and we've asked all of these people that we've interviewed, what do you feel was the end of WCW? What do you feel was the sort of the event that kind of put it in that downward spiral?
I personally say there wasn't just one thing. I say it was just a mixture of a lot of different things. So there wasn't just one thing. Yeah,
I gotta say NWO probably, but this last pre-taped interview that we have it was a great interview, and it's a guy that a lot of you probably aren't very familiar with. He did a lot of the internet broadcasting and things like that. He did a lot of the backstage things on DirecTV at the time, and he was also the NWO announcer, the Deli Boy. His name is Chad Damiani, so we're going to go to that right now. And we are back now with the WCW Tribute Radio Show. We are joined by the former internet host for WCW's pay-per-view broadcasts, and also did the blast backstage for DirecTV, also known as the Deli Boy. We are joined by Chad Damiani. Chad, how are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for coming on. We're doing this show where we're really talking about a lot of the good things that came out of WCW here on the anniversary of its unfortunate demise. So we got some good questions, so if you don't mind, we're going to go and get started.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Now, this is JT, of course. I just have a few questions for you. And my first question is, how did you first initially get involved with WCW?
Well, I worked for Turner Broadcasting Network well before, this is before sort of WCW had really brought out the NWO, etc. And I just made some friends down there while I was working for a completely different project. And I actually started by just working for the website, writing reviews of Monday Nitros. Just I'd have to watch them and write the reviews, and they paid me for those. And then my big break, was when they started the NWO, they had something called the NWO Hotline. I don't know if you guys remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
$1.99 a minute, you call in. Well, there were legal problems because Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Hogan specifically would never update their messages. So if people called in 2 days in a row paying $2 a minute, they would get the same message. So I got this kind of crazy job where I would have to check the hotline at 12:01 a.m. And if those guys hadn't re-recorded a message, then I would have to record a message just so there was something different there. And that's where the whole Deli Boy thing started, because I didn't know what to talk about because, I didn't have any inside information. I didn't realize you could just make it all up at that point. So I just used to do funny sort of, or, I thought they were funny, these sort of interviews as the Deli Boy, and I'd interview my actor friends in New York, and we just do these 10-minute, sort of spoofs on wrestling, and they paid me for it, and that's kind of how it all started.
Now, what are some of your fondest memories of your time in WCW?
It was as much, and I'm really glad you guys are focusing on the positive, as much as it reached a peak of frustration sort of before we got sold. There were some magical times. I think, I was in Chattanooga when the Giant turned to the New World Order. That's to this day, and I've worked a lot of live events, that was one of the greatest crowd responses I'd ever seen. I had the opportunity to commentate with Ted DiBiase, Kurt Hennig. I was the last person, I think, in a wrestling capacity to work with Rick Rude before his untimely passing. So I got to meet a lot of my heroes, people I really admired as a kid, and work with them. I wouldn't say on a peer level, but sort of learn from them, and just, it was like a kid's dream come true, and for me that was the most exciting part.
Mm-hmm. Now, every company obviously has, its politics and, some stuff that's going on backstage that the people that work for the company don't like. What was one thing that you saw that if you had the power to, you would have changed in the company?
First and foremost, honest to God, I feel like the biggest change that needed to happen was Turner needed to care about what we were doing. We were such the redheaded stepchild of the company that basically, even though they were throwing money our way and we were making them a lot of money, they didn't pay attention at all to any of the business decisions we were making. They didn't pay attention to the musical chairs of people running the company, doing creative for the company. In fact, I think if you would have spoken to the top executives, I forget, Dr. Schiller, I think, was running TNT Sports at the time. I don't think he even understood how a wrestling show happened. I don't even think he understood what things had to go on and how things were scripted or not scripted to even make a production a reality. And we were doing shows every Monday, and then eventually, with Thunder, we were doing these live shows every week, and they had no clue. So it was very easy for people to take the reins of control, spend out of control. There was no culpability. And I don't actually blame really a lot of the guys who kind of contributed perhaps to overspending and sinking the company, because that was the culture. We were completely isolated from that corporate model and left to our own devices. And it was bound to happen. And when you got there, first you were excited about how money was spent and how, things changed like a soap opera in terms of who was running things on a weekly basis. But then as you kind of got to see that, you just realized it had to end, and it was going to end badly.
Mm-hmm. Now, can you share a funny locker room story or road story that you have from your time there?
Oh, I can tell you my favorite. It's so silly, but I'd mentioned I'd gotten to commentate with Rick Rude. Rick Rude was friendly with Eric Bischoff because they all came from that sort of AWA, Minnesota, Minneapolis kind of area, and they wanted to groom him to be a color commentator. I mean, the guy had so much talent and just got such a natural reaction from fans. So I found out that he was going to be my color commentator for WCW's Backstage Blast was this thing we did on DirecTV where we would sort of commentate during the commercial breaks. So, I mean, I was a huge Rick Rude fan, so already I was trying not to be a mark and just be professional. And also it was kind of exciting because my job was to help him cultivate his, like I was there to help him as opposed to what you would imagine was me learning from him and everything that he knew, because commentating was what I did. And the first show that he commentated at was at the Minneapolis Metrodome. And they built this 3-story riser with no safety bars around it. They put a desk on it, and they put us up there with these huge lights. And you have to understand that in Minneapolis, Rick Rude was a big star everywhere, but there he's a massive star. So right from the beginning of our broadcast, a lot of people were yelling to him, shouting out. You know, he was garnering a lot of attention. He didn't like color commentating very much. You could tell. You know, he was a guy who wanted to be in the ring and wanted to be the center of attention. And in the middle of the broadcast, we were talking about something else, and he just, all of a sudden, he goes, hey, I bet I can get this crowd. This is on the air, he says this. I bet I can get this crowd chanting my name in under 5 minutes. I won't even have to leave my chair. I was like, okay, you know, where are you going to go with something like this? The show is going on, but obviously, you know, he's the star. So I was like, how are you going to do that? And he points to this woman, just like she's a speck. She's way in the nosebleeds. And he goes, I'm going to do it by staring at her. So he just starts staring at this girl. And it takes about 30 seconds for her boyfriend to notice. And the boyfriend stands up, and I could barely hear him. He's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? This and that. And all the people in his section start to notice. And they're like, you know, they're getting really riled up. And he's not moving. That's what I have to sell. He's just leering like he used to back in the day. Well, that little section of the Metrodome, which was sold out that night, just starts going, Rick Rude sucks. Rick Rude sucks. And then, you know, it starts to spread a little bit and a little bit more. And now it's, I would say, like a tenth of the arena is saying it. This whole time there's this like, and I'm no offense to these guys, but there was this terrible match going on between Van Hammer and somebody else, I think Ron Reese. No one's paying attention. So right when the chant is about to die down, all he does is he just takes his headset off. That's all he does. And I don't know why that riled the crowd, but just from doing that, half the entire arena starts going, Rick Rude. Now it's deafening. This Rick Rude sucks, Rick Rude sucks. So, you know, as a fan, you know, and as a commentator, you're always behind the scenes. It was like, oh my God, this is so cool to kind of be at the center of this. So I did my commentator duties, and I stand up, and I walk to the edge of the riser, and I do the shushing motion, begging the crowd to quiet down, which, of course, any wrestling fan knows is only going to make things worse. So now the entire arena is chanting Rick Rude sucks, and all this attention's on us. And I'm like, this is, you know, for a minute it was really cool. I was like, this is what it must feel like to be like a, you know, pro wrestler, a big star, you know, just to be the center of all this attention. And then the food started flying. People were just throwing stuff at us. Rick Rude doesn't even look, he looks like he's waiting for a bus. Could care less. And so I go to sit back down, and all of a sudden, an orange comes flying from I don't know where, and it hits our desk so hard that the Backstage Blast sign goes flying off the desk. And my heart is like in my throat. I am so sure we're going to die. And I look at Rick Rude like, what should we do? And on the air, he just, as calm as you can imagine, says, who brings a orange to a wrestling match? That was just his wry observation. He'd seen a million times worse. He could care less. In terms of in the ring, I think the most exciting thing that I watched and commentated on was when Roddy Piper returned and confronted Hogan for the first time. That was just like my childhood had exploded in my head and had bled out to the ring. And there were so many great moments like that in those from 96 to, I'd say, 98 before things started to kind of cycle in a weird way. You know, there's too many to count.
Yeah, you know, it was right around mid-1998 where things kind of started to, you know, turn for the worse there. Now, was there one experience you had at that time in WCW that kind of upset you and really made you just sort of wonder what you were still doing there?
That, you know, obviously when Vince started winning again, things changed so dramatically in terms of the emotions backstage. But I definitely think that a lot of my frustration and a lot of people's frustration backstage came through a lot of the talent that was kind of put in a box, and these were not going to be the guys who were the stars. Eric Bischoff, he did a lot of great things, but part of his legacy also is the infamous no-cut contract that he started doling out pretty freely, a lot to friends of his from previous promotions. I think the Steiner brothers, I think Scott Norton at one point had a no-cut contract, I'm not sure, but it became a situation where you had this class system where guys who were part of one of the various NWOs or friends with the right people they were bulletproof. No matter how their angles went, no matter how the crowd reacted to them, didn't matter. They were going to be on the air. And then you had the, Jerichos and Benoits and Guerreros, who, the crowds were connecting with, and it was obvious, but they were kind of relegated to this small piece of the card. And for me, that was the most frustrating thing. And we tried a lot. I worked a lot with the internet and the magazine, and we tried to do our part. But the reality is that TV time is TV time, and all those ancillary media outlets can only help push a star forward if TV's behind them. And you just knew that the wrong decisions were being made in terms of who was being focused on.
Now, when you're talking about a no-cut contract, let's clarify this for the listeners, pretty much. Now, was there like one event that you feel kind of was the beginning of the end or caused the demise of WCW?
I think one of the things that happened early on that was a forebearer of bad things was never, like with all the Sting, NWO, Hogan stuff, which the crowd was so hot for, that they never really gave the audience that blow-off satisfaction. Like they had brought them to a frenzy, but were so desperate to kind of keep the wheels in motion and not have to start over. And there were a number of events like that, and under a number of bookers, by the way. There wasn't one guy making these decisions, but I never felt that the audience really felt that Sting really got what was coming, in terms of, he'd worked so hard and so long. I mean, we stretched that out way too long. We should have blown it off 6 months earlier, and when it happened, it was flat. And then you have incidents, I think, like Kevin Nash just laying down the infamous finger pin, and all these things to sort of protect guys and their records and their reputations that left the fans feeling unsatisfied. And, I think over on the other side, up north, those guys were finding ways to really satisfy the fans. And, with DX and Austin, and those guys were really getting the best of the bad guys and really sort of giving fans wish fulfillment. And I think once that started and played out, then things just got crazy. I think we all have probably a dozen or so angles that we can't even believe happened. And look, the truth is you do have to throw stuff at the wall. And, the guys who write are in an unenviable position to have to produce that much TV per week. But it felt like the talent was at the expense of a lot of those ideas, and that belts didn't matter anymore. And people turned on a dime. I think Buff Bagwell turned like 19 times. This is exaggeration, but at what point it's like the Matrix, like fans don't know what to think. And but I think definitely the beginning of the end was we found something that worked. We found this feud that people really connected to, and we never gave the people what they wanted. But despite it probably sinking us, that Wild West aspect of this Southern promotion, where, we had a different king every month. It's exciting when that show manages to come together for 3 hours every Monday night. I miss that. I work in Hollywood now. I'm a screenwriter. And, it's a lot of sitting and thinking and contemplating and writing and rewriting. And there, we didn't have that luxury. Everything that came out of your mouth was heard. Every idea that was structured was going to be played out and either approved or denied by fans. And I mean, I don't know of any other business that has that kind of rush on a weekly basis, and it was definitely satisfying.
And finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the end of WCW and the final Nitro. What were you feeling, or what was your opinions? What did you think when you found out Vince McMahon had bought the company?
Well, This is so funny. This is basically the wrestling equivalent of the Kennedy assassination question. Like where I was really in the last 6 months before we closed, backstage there was a rumor about a different financial entity buying us every other week. And before that final, what was it in Panama City? Was that the final Nitro?
Yeah, Panama City, 10 years ago to the day.
And it was that terrible club, right? There was a huge nightclub in Panama City, and it was just the skankiest. I mean, you could get hepatitis taking a shot in that club. And I remember it was those final months. It's one thing. I was one of those young guys that loved campy stuff. To be totally honest, I think the reason I preferred Southern wrestling promotions a lot of times was for the unintentional humor. I think when we were all kids, I remember, Dusty Rhodes coming out with a guy in a monkey suit, and guys getting hit with TV sets and all this. I love that as much as I love the stuff that really drew me in. So with WCW, when things started to go sour and, Vince Russo came in, Kevin Sullivan had crazy ideas, it was kind of funny to be part of that, to see things go out there that you knew were going to fail. And it was, but at the end of the day, that was still my home, It's like watching a great house party where everything gets destroyed and you're like, I live here. This is no good. And that had really set in that we were not putting out a product worthy of people tuning in. And that on the other side, Vince and those guys were putting out a fantastic product. So I didn't go to that last Nitro. I opted out of it. I was supposed to go for the WCW.com. And I just decided to stay home. I'd gotten to that point where it wasn't even fun to go to a place like Panama City. And I had no idea when I was watching the show and writing writing the report on the event as I had when I first started with the company 5 years earlier from my house. And that sort of simulcast takes place with Vince and Shane. I was marking out like crazy at my house. I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I actually, they got me. I believed when all that happened that we were going to be run separately and that, they were going to do this great thing where they'd go back and forth on Monday nights or they'd find us a new home and we were all going to have jobs. And so I went to bed that night buzzing, so excited. And then the next morning it was 9:01. And a guy I know from the office at the time, the vice president of marketing, he called me. And I was like, Aaron, my God, did you watch last night? Wasn't that the greatest show? What an angle. This is the best angle in the history of wrestling. And he's like, yeah, so we need to talk about your severance package. I was like, oh, wait, I really did get fired? It never crossed my mind I'd been fired on live television by Vince McMahon, and so that was, needless to say, that was a tough couple of weeks to go from that high to that low. But there was a part of me that was relieved because I didn't think I could leave it. I didn't think I could, the rush, the excitement, I was even, not that I ever participated in the politics, but I sort of became fascinated by the politics and the rumor mongering and all the stuff that helps destroy a promotion. So in a way, it was kind of, it's like when a drug addict goes to prison and gets clean. It was like something dramatic needed to happen for me to move away from it all.
Well, all right, Chad, I want to thank you for joining us and sharing some of your memories, giving us the broadcaster's point of view.
My pleasure, and, WCW, gone but not forgotten, you will be missed.
Okay, and welcome back. You have just heard the WCW Tribute Radio Show. I want to thank everybody for sticking with us for the 3-hour show. It was a fantastic show. It was a lot of fun to make. And it was something that was very personal to me. So, everyone who enjoyed it, leave us the feedback, and we're very appreciative of it. We just want to go into a couple of plugs here. Want to say hello to our friends over at Gimmicks Wrestling Tees. They are the future of wrestling t-shirts. Fuck a sign, wear a t-shirt. Check out False Count Radio as we're in the process of sort of upgrading it a little bit. Also check out WrestleHustle.com for all your wrestling news and notes. Also, if you're a fan of that hot Australian independent scene, they have an extensive look at that there. Also, check out Kayfabe Collectibles on our eBay store. Or not our eBay store, but they're the official eBay store of False Count Radio. If you're looking for any kind of autographs, things like that, they have them there. So, fans, again, I just want to say thank you, and we will see you next time on False Count Radio. Have a good day.
Welcome to a landmark night in the industry of sports entertainment. I have seen it.
I, Vince McMahon, fought my competition.
And I still cannot believe it.
That's right. I own WCW.
1,000 Lakes, Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Mall of America, the only building big enough to hold the debut edition of WCW Monday Nitro. We are coming to you live here on TNT.
Hulkamania! Hulk Hogan is here! Hulk Hogan's here! Hulk Hogan is in the building!
You damn right he is!
Go get him, Hulkster! Yeah, but whose side is he on? What are you talking about? Whose side is he on? What are you talking about? Yes, sir! Get him, Hogan! Go get him, baby!
Come on and get some of this now!
Who's bad now, boys?
Hulk Hogan arrived. Hulk!
What is he doing?
My God!
Is he the third man?
He's the third man!
What the hell is going on here?
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW! He is the third man!
Look at this
picture!
Oh my God!
What the hell is going on?
Oh my God!
Are you kidding me?
Probably the lowest shot ever given to professional wrestling.
Return.
Is this your deal, Russo?
Wow.
That's why this company's in the damn shape it's in, because of bullshit like this.
My God, this is real life. 1, 2, 3.
Ladies and gentlemen,